Chapter 1045. The Company. Roland said in a low voice. What? Victor was slightly startled. If you have any doubts, I can explain it again. No need. Roland waved his hand. This is indeed an interesting plan. At least it seems to be fine. If you want to implement it, how long will it take for you to prepare the funds? Victor's eyes lit up with joy. I knew you would understand it. Please forgive my rudeness, Your Majesty. If you were also a businessman, your achievements would definitely not be inferior to any big chamber of commerce. This metaphor seemed to lower the status of the king, but it was a way of expressing a high degree of recognition in aristocratic etiquette, and could also be regarded as a kind of undisguised flattery. At this moment, Roland had a completely different idea. Isn't this a large-scale industrial company in the future? Settle down with technology, recruit workers, organize production and marketing, and control profits and losses. He did not expect to hear such a complete plan from a contemporary person. The biggest difference between this plan and the Chamber of Commerce was that this plan combined production and sales, which could be said to be the prototype of modern private enterprises. This might be an excellent opportunity. In the past 4 years, his territory had achieved rapid development, but it had gradually revealed its shortcomings. That was, the administrative office almost took care of everything. Every project needed to be controlled by the administrative office. From the establishment of staff to the allocation of budget, these complicated work regulations took up most of the time of the officials. As the scale of the project continued to expand, it was bound to become more and more bloated, and the administrative efficiency would accordingly decrease. This could be regarded as a common problem of state-owned enterprises. Once the profits and losses had nothing to do with the participants, stability was everything. It had the advantage of being determined by the will of the higher-ups regardless of the returns. It could quickly meet the needs in the early stage, and could also be used to conquer those risky strategic projects in the later stage. But it did not mean that it was omnipotent. This was also one of the reasons why Roland focused on developing heavy industry and agriculture in Neverwinter, and paid little attention to light industry. In addition to the limited labor force, the administrative office could not provide so many officials to cope with the expansion of the types of industries. After all, it was easy to issue an order, but to really implement it, even if it was to build a steam engine assembly plant, it would need the support of a whole team of people. But now he had a new choice. Before he could use any means to attract investment, someone had already taken the initiative to send it to him. Naturally, Roland had no reason to refuse. Although this company had the background of a foreign aristocratic family, and would inevitably cause a certain amount of golden dragon to flow out after the profit, as long as its production department was in Grey Castle, this was not a big deal. After reaching a preliminary agreement, Roland personally sent Victor to the gate of the castle. When you are ready, I think the new cotton seeds should be cultivated. But I have to make one thing clear. If there are other businessmen who want to follow your example, the administrative office will sell the seeds to them at the same price. The more abundant the goods on the market, the more affordable the price. You should know this better than me. Of course, Your Majesty, Victor said confidently. The merchants of the Kingdom of Dawn are never afraid of competition. My father always said that from the moment we were born, the competition began. When he was about to leave, Roland suddenly stopped him. By the way, I want to ask you a question. My minister found out that 6 years ago, you paid taxes to Longsong Stronghold. Why? At that time, if you wanted to save this amount of money, it should have been easy for you, right? Victor nodded. But at that time, the Lord promised that as long as the taxes were paid, he would provide some convenience and protection for the caravans traveling between the border and Longsong Stronghold. And he did so. At that time, this amount of money could at least prevent the threat of wild beasts and attacks from his peers. I always feel that it is good for businessmen to pay a little price for a stable and orderly rule. Unfortunately, many people would rather invest a large amount of money on worthless goods than regard the rule as one of the costs. What an interesting person. Roland could not help thinking as he watched the merchant leave. With such a person as an example, the private enterprises of Grey Castle should also usher in a period of rapid and vigorous development. Just as he was about to return to his office, Nightingale's anxious voice suddenly rang in his ear. Your Majesty, lightning is back. She seems to be in trouble. What's the situation? Roland asked hurriedly. I'm not sure. I just received a message from Sylvie. After she was brought back by Maggie, she was directly sent to the hospital. Roland's heart suddenly sank. She's injured? Take me to see her now. Yes, Your Majesty. Nightingale reached out to grab him, and then the two of them disappeared into the mist together. After arriving at the hospital in the west of the city, Roland saw the little girl lying on the bed. The moment he opened the door, his worries were greatly dispelled. Lightning looked unscathed, and there were no obvious wounds or bloodstains on her face. Her chest was still moving up and down, which meant that she was fine. Even if she had encountered danger during the investigation, she was now safe. But he soon found that something was wrong. Nana did not feel relieved at all after completing the treatment. Instead, she frowned and looked down at her hands with a puzzled look. Maggie was nervously lying on the bed, wiping Lightning's forehead with her hand. When she saw Roland, she even shrank her neck into her clothes, as if she had done something wrong. At this moment, Roland noticed that Maggie's face was constantly sweating, and her slightly open lips were letting out shallow moans, as if she was immersed in a nightmare. What's the matter? Roland looked at Nana. Where is Lightning hurt? Nana raised her head and slowly pointed to her chest. Nightingale. Yes. Nightingale walked forward, carefully picked up Lightning, helped her take off the special windproof coat, and then slowly unbuttoned the lining. Just as she reached the collarbone, she could not help but stop. Your Majesty, this is... Roland approached the bed and found that there was a thumb-sized wound 2 fingers below Lightning's neck. Compared with the surrounding snow-white skin, the wound was particularly eye-catching. But if you looked closely, you would find that it did not even hurt the muscle layer, but only the skin. It was a small wound that would heal itself if left unattended. It was reasonable to say that healing such a wound would be a trivial matter for Nana in the blink of an eye. But what she said next made Roland freeze in place. Chapter 1046. Her ability failed? Nightingale looked at Maggie in surprise. Was she hurt by a senior demon? Coo. Maggie's voice was as soft as a mosquito's. What? Yes. She answered again, and this time everyone heard Maggie's words clearly. I pecked her coo. What? Roland and Nightingale looked at each other, and saw the look of disbelief in each other's eyes. Then both of them asked almost simultaneously, what happened at that time? You can tell us from the beginning to the end first. After understanding the whole story, Roland frowned deeply. A powerful demon that looked very similar to a human, even from a distance, would feel a strong sense of fear. Moreover, Lightning was flying at the speed of sound at that time. But she was still stared at by the demon? Compared to this information, the news of demonic beasts and demons fighting on the snowfield, and the skeleton monster attacking as a weapon were not so shocking. In order to wake Lightning up, Maggie pecked her on the chest hard, so that both of them could escape. Otherwise, if she continued to fly, she would sooner or later run into the arms of the enemy. There was no doubt that the wound could not heal because of Maggie, not to mention that she did not have such an ability. Even if she did, she would certainly not want to hurt her closest friend. So he could only look for the reason from Lightning. Thinking of this, he could not help but sigh secretly. Before they set off, he had repeatedly told her not to rely on her new ability to go into danger alone. Coming back safely was more important than anything else. In the end, she still couldn't control that impulse. Perhaps this was the nature inherited from the blood of an explorer. But at this moment, he was not in the mood to blame Lightning. The urgent task was not to pursue the fault, but to find out what the problem was. Roland asked Nightingale to call Vendi, Lily, Agatha, and Nightfall. In addition to further examination, they also planted the seed of symbiosis to prevent accidents. The group of people busied themselves until the evening, when Lightning finally woke up from her coma, and a comprehensive physical examination had also come to a preliminary conclusion. Are you saying that her body is fine? After listening to Agatha's report, Roland turned around and stole a glance at the pale little girl curled up in Vendi's arms. How can this be considered safe and sound? The previous drowsiness was due to the exhaustion caused by flying for a long period of time. The seed of symbiosis can also prove this. Nightfall did not feel any discomfort. This meant that her low condition was caused by mental panic and had nothing to do with her body. In theory, a few more days of rest should be enough. What happened to the wound? That's what I wanted to say next, Agatha said in a low voice. Her problem lies in her magic power. When I used the stone of measuring to check, I felt a trace of feedback that didn't belong to her. What do you mean? Roland was startled. You should know that although magic power is everywhere, if you want to use it, you must first make it your own. This is what we often call condensation. Whether it is the cyclone or the advanced hieroglyphs, they all belong to this category. The demons are no exception, but the magic power they possess is completely different from that of witches. When it is reflected in the stone of measuring, it is like the difference between clean water and rotten juice. She paused for a moment and said, and the strange feedback I received was almost the same as that of the demons. Roland suddenly felt that things were a little tricky. You mean, the demons have eroded lightning's magic power, without direct contact? How is that possible? Nightingale questioned. I can easily distinguish different types of magic power in the misty world. If she was eroded, I should be able to tell at a glance. Compared to lightning's own magic power, it is too subtle, so it is very normal that it was overlooked. Agatha shook her head. But this is only from the perception of the stone of measuring. As for whether it is the erosion that your Majesty mentioned, I am not sure. Roland quickly understood the meaning of her words. Demons have never had such an ability before? If it is only affected by sight without direct contact, such an ability is not rare. For example, the fearsome demon is the most typical example. It is not unusual for senior demons to have similar characteristics. After all, they obtain their power through the magic stone, and it is not predestined when they awaken. But I have never heard of this kind of effect that prevents the wound from healing. Agatha muttered. If part of the magic power really comes from the demons and is attached to the wound, then everything makes sense. Indeed, if this was caused by the demon's ability, it could explain why Nana's treatment suddenly became ineffective. She could cure demons, but it did not mean that she could ignore the malicious power of the demons. Roland asked in a low voice, then what's the solution? I don't know for now, the Ice Witch said bluntly. Theoretically, the magic power effect can be broken by approaching the God Stone of Retaliation. But it turns out that this ability is obviously not that simple. Since it works on the wound, how about we cut off the surrounding area of the wound and then treat it? I suggest you don't do that. If it continues to expand along with the wound, it will be difficult to save the situation. At least for now, this little injury of lightning's will not affect her safety. Agatha rejected. In the next few days, it is better to let her stay in the third border city and continue to observe her for a while. Pasha and the others know more than I do. Maybe they can find a way to dispel it. I see. Roland nodded and slowly walked to the bedside. Seeing him, Lightning immediately lowered her head and sounded as if she was about to cry. Your Majesty, I'm sorry. You don't have to say anything. Roland reached out and touched her head. Just rest well. I will definitely cure you. Lightning's body trembled as if she was trying her best to hold back her tears. After a long time, she gave an almost imperceptible response. Yes. 3 days later, Roland received a report on Tequila's progress. He immediately set off with Nightingale, Vendi, and the others, entering the third border city hidden deep under the North Slope Mountains. Pasha received him at the entrance of the hall. How is Lightning? She has recovered a lot. Elena has been by her side these days, telling her all the interesting stories in the dream world. She almost forgot the encounter with the senior demon. Pasha said with a smile. She even flew around the hall with Maggie today, so the small wound on her chest didn't affect her movements at all. Hearing this, Roland was a little relieved. In order not to make Thunder worry, only a few witches knew about Lightning's experience. However, if she did not show up for a long time, it would inevitably cause people to worry, and then it would be difficult to hide. Did you find out what kind of ability it is? Vendi asked eagerly. Celine went through all the documents left by Tequila, but still couldn't find any matching records. Therefore, we can be sure that this should be a new ability of the demons. However, it did not mean that there was no similar ability. In fact, the effect it caused was quite similar to a rare special ability. What's that? Chapter 1047. Curse. Roland couldn't help but repeat. The word sounded ominous no matter how he thought about it. Please follow me. Pasha turned around and led them into a cave next to the main hall. The stone walls inside were carved with grooves, and all kinds of books and scrolls were piled up on the grooves. The number of books here was even more than those in the pivotal hall. Celine, His Majesty is here. Got it. Celine's voice echoed in everyone's mind before they even saw her. Then a tentacle descended from the bottom of the cave, dropping a pile of books with a clatter, and quickly retracted back into the darkness. Before that, the tentacle also symbolically bent towards Roland, probably as a sign of respect. Ahem. Sorry, she'll be more forgetful when she meets a new research subject. After all, there are very few witches who are as lucky as Lightning. She was cursed but didn't suffer any fatal injuries. She won't do anything to Lightning, will she? When it came to research subjects, Roland couldn't help but think of the little white mice that were placed in all kinds of positions. Don't worry, the main method of magic research is still observation and recording, but with the help of the core, she can clearly see the flow of every strand of magic. Pasha rolled up the book on the ground and spread it out in front of everyone. Look here. And here. Roland noticed that most of these pages were yellowed, which meant that they were ancient books left behind from the Tequila era. At the position indicated by the other party, in addition to the original text recorded in the witch's language, there was also a translated note attached, which was undoubtedly a temporary excerpt for this purpose. He took a closer look and found that it was an account of 2 wars. During the siege of the Land of Dawn, 8 wounded witches were rescued by the reinforcements. They should have been able to survive, but in the end they all died one by one. The cause of death was that all treatment methods were ineffective, the wound could not heal, resulting in excessive blood loss, and the infection of the demonic disease. Before they died, they both endured terrible torture, to the point that the 2 of them chose to commit suicide. Pasha said slowly, because it was too long ago, the specific details of the battle are not known. The author only recorded this incredible scene, and it was here that the curse of the devil was first mentioned. The other time was closer to our time. A senior demon, called the Soul Snatcher by the Union, had a fierce battle with the witch army in Thousand Lakes, on the edge of the fertile plains. This cruel monster could attach magic power to the Blackstone spear. Once hit, the body would continuously deteriorate until it withered. Pasha paused for a moment. 3 extraordinaries died in its hands, and the Quest Society found strange magic in the bodies of the victims. Roland had already guessed the conclusion. That magic power came from the enemy? That's right. Pasha nodded her tentacles. That's why we speculated that these abilities might belong to the same type. They will always remain in the target's body and cause continuous damage. Conventional treatment methods were ineffective, and it was difficult to rely on external forces to remove it. Indeed, it's like a curse. Vendi could not help but feel a little sad. This is too terrible. Nightingale noticed the wording of Pasha's words. It's difficult to rely on external forces to remove it, which means there are ways to remove it. Pasha continued to turn the page. That is, if our inference is correct. Roland quickly skimmed through the last part of the description. Just when Thousand Lakes was on the brink of destruction, a witch called Samantha stood up and fought with her life on the line, awakening as a transcendent and slaying the soul flayer with her sword. After the senior demon was split into 2, Samantha, who thought that she would follow in the footsteps of her companions, survived safely, as if the curse had never existed. Because Thousand Lakes was too close to the Red Mist area, it was declared lost a year later, but she had bought enough time for people to evacuate. After that, Samantha used her extremely strong will to make the Union adopt the 3-chief system, and she became one of the first 3 chiefs. Seeing this, Roland immediately understood what Samantha meant. If Lightning was really affected by the magic curse, then killing her might be the only way to remove it. However, it was indeed very difficult to do so. The battle at the Snow Mountain camp and the battle at the northbound slope had proved the senior demon's amazing mobility. If they insisted on fighting the first army head-on, it would be fine. However, if they did not intend to fight head-on, it would be too risky to catch up with and destroy them. In the Tequila era, this would have been an impossible task. The senior demons usually acted together with the army, and were like the core of the army. It was already difficult to win, let alone to kill all the enemies. Roland could not help but think of the unknown witch who wrote the letter to Natalia. Now that he thought about it, she might also have been injured by a similar ability, which was why she left those last words. A person who could communicate with the three chiefs by letter was definitely not an ordinary person. Her ability and status should be at the top of the Union. However, even she could only silently accept the final outcome. If she wanted to find the powerful enemy among the thousands of demons and eliminate it, she would have to sacrifice more witches' lives. Between the two evils, it was clear which choice to make. Nightingale probably also thought of this and unconsciously clenched her hands into fists. Roland pondered for a moment and then said, "It's indeed difficult, but I will never give up this possibility." Pasha was silent for a while. "If that's what you want. Before that, I want to know something. If the senior demon Lightning Met has the ability to release a curse without touching it, what will happen to ordinary people?" "It will be much worse than a witch," Celine's voice suddenly interrupted. Celine's voice suddenly interrupted again. "Magic power gives us a stronger recovery ability and resistance, which makes it difficult for the common demonic plague, which is the tiny creatures you mentioned in the book, to infect us. But ordinary people can't. As long as their wounds don't heal, they will be in danger of worsening or even dying. Can the God's Stone of Retaliation resist this ability?" "Of course it can. In fact, if the soul snatchers mentioned in the ancient book were not as strong as the extraordinary, they wouldn't have caused such a great loss to the Union. But..." Celine paused. "According to Lightning's information, we can't rule out the possibility that the senior demon is also a magic slayer. If that's the case, the God's Stone of Retaliation will be very limited. The more powerful a demon was, the more it looked like a human. This was the experience the Union had learned from the 2 battles of divine will." Roland took a deep breath. Celine's warning was not an exaggeration. According to Lightning's description, the new senior demon was likely to be more difficult to deal with than all the previous enemies. Chapter 1048. Lightning and Maggie slowly landed on the roof of the witch building. After closing the door of the corridor, the howling cold wind subsided a lot, leaving only a few whispers that slipped in through the cracks. "Phew, my hair is all wet, coo." The pigeon shook off the snowflakes on her body and turned back into a human. Her wings swelled to both sides and eventually turned into her white hair that reached her ankles. Although it looked and felt very soft, the girl's hair was not blown into a mess by the strong wind. Instead, it wrapped around her like a cotton ball. However, due to being soaked by the snow, her hair appeared to be a little dull and had lost its initial fluffiness. "Well, you should take a bath first in case you catch a cold." Lightning took off her windproof eye mask and glanced outside the door. The weather during the months of the demons was always so unpredictable. Just now, there were only scattered snowflakes, but now it was windy and snowy. The world was full of palm-sized snowflakes, so she had to temporarily stop her recovery training. "Aren't you going to take a bath with me?" Maggie asked in surprise. "Didn't His Majesty say that the wound should be kept dry and not in contact with water?" Lightning shrugged and said, "So I'll just use hot water to rub it. Anyway, this coat won't let the snow water seep in." "I see." She pushed away the bangs stuck in front of her face and grinned, showing her white teeth. "Then I'll help you after I take a bath. In the past, Ashes often praised me for rubbing your back. It was very comfortable and I didn't need a towel, coo." How do you rub it?" "Like this, coo." She grabbed 2 bunches of hair and made a circle gesture. "I refuse." Lightning rolled her eyes. "If it's a towel, I'll consider it. Anyway, hurry up." "Oh." After Maggie ran to the castle with the bathtub, Lightning went back to her bedroom alone. She closed the door, leaned against the door, and stretched out her right hand. Even now, her fingertips were still trembling uncontrollably, as if they were out of her control. She couldn't help but smile bitterly. As long as she closed her eyes, the image of the devil would always appear in her mind. After these days of recovery, the fear did not leave her, but took root in her heart. This was the first time that Lightning had encountered such a situation. Whether it was in front of His Majesty or her companions in the exploration group, she tried her best to look relaxed, as if the injury was not a big deal. Even Nightingale did not notice anything wrong with her. But in fact, only she knew how bad her situation was. He had asked Maggie to take a bath alone because he was afraid that Maggie would be able to see through this, to see how fragile this self-proclaimed adventurer was. Lightning slowly slid to the ground and buried her head between her knees. Although Phyllis comforted her by telling her that the enemy might have the ability to inflict fear by looking at her, she knew that it was not an excuse. Witches had a high resistance to mental influence, not to mention that it had been a long time. At that time, Maggie was also affected by the devil, but Maggie's performance was much better than hers. If it was just fear, it would not be a big deal. It was not the first time that she had felt fear. Fear came from the unknown. Unless one could be omniscient, there was no way to avoid fear. The key was after the fear. In the past, this kind of emotion would not bother her for too long. Instead, it would arouse her resistance. She had always believed that nothing could really scare her. However, this time, Lightning found that there was only emptiness left in her heart. Not to mention resistance, she did not even want to think about the scene at that time. Today, during the recovery training, she lingered in the east of Neverwinter, and did not go beyond the city wall. It was not because of her ability or body, but because she was afraid of the bottomless snowfield. The ground under her feet seemed to become a steep cliff, and the edge of the sky seemed to be a crack that swallowed everything. Just looking into the distance, she could feel the trembling from the bottom of her heart. She was not defeated by the devil's magic power, but frightened by the devil's evil and power, as if she had encountered a predator's prey. This kind of fear was even more serious than the influence of the devil's magic power, and even hindered her flight. Lightning hugged her knees tightly. What leader of the exploration group? She was just a coward. If Thunder was still by her side, what would he do? For someone who had crossed countless dangerous seas, he must have a way to deal with this kind of situation, right? Father. She could not help but murmur. What should I do? South of the Misty Forest, Forest Station Number 0. This was also the starting station of the Barbarian Railway line. With the success of the steam train, the development of the forest in Neverwinter would be greatly improved, from wood to food, and even the coal mines near the Snow Mountains. Everything was included in the new railway line plan. In the coming year, this vast forest, which was originally uninhabited and full of wild beasts, would become a real treasure house. But now the railway was still built for only one purpose. That was war. The area around the station had been blocked by the First Army, waiting for His Majesty to test the new weapon. Iron Axe was naturally one of them. He still remembered the scene 4 years ago when he followed His Majesty to participate in the test of gunpowder explosion. At that time, he was just an insignificant hunter who regarded gunpowder as the fire of divine punishment. The earth-shaking roar seemed to have opened a door for him that he had never seen before. From that day on, his fate had changed dramatically. Now, as the commander of the First Army in Grey Castle, Iron Axe naturally would not passively participate in the tests like before. He had long known what he was going to face today. In fact, it could not really be regarded as a new weapon. Its two main parts, the cannon and the train, had already been shown in front of everyone, so it was certainly not fresh. Because of this, he thought that he could finally put away his surprise and get through the test in a relatively calm mood. It should be like this. After all, he was an important minister of His Majesty, so he should be calm at all times. Even if his back was facing the thunder and fire, he should still smile, just like His Majesty himself. However, as the whistle blew and the new weapon slowly drove out of the garage, Iron Axe found that he was wrong. The train was no longer what it looked like when they first saw it. It was completely covered with black steel plates, and only half of the wheels were exposed. The outline of the train was square and angular, and it gave off a strong sense of oppression when seen from the front. It formed a sharp contrast with the surrounding snowy landscape. It was definitely not a good thing. With just a glance, one would understand this logic. His Majesty often said that machines were wonderful things. Iron Axe did not quite understand it, but when he saw the white mist spurting out from the roof and between the wheels and brushing over the neatly riveted surface of the armor, Iron Axe suddenly understood what His Majesty meant. The giant steel ship was also shocking, but it was less attractive than the train in front of him, because it was not just a machine. Chapter 1049. When the train stopped in front of them, Iron Axe could finally see it in its entirety. It had a total of 5 segments, much shorter than the one that had been shown to the public. However, because it was wrapped in steel, it looked much thicker and larger. Coupled with its non-reflective pitch-black exterior, it looked like a crouching wild beast. The shape of the front and the back of the vehicle was exactly the same, but they were arranged symmetrically. Apart from the 2 rotating machine gun turrets, there were also many small holes on the armor belt below. Without a doubt, those holes were for the soldiers to observe and shoot. Iron Axe could already imagine the scene when the enemies rushed toward the new weapon. Spears fell like rain and hit the steel plates, making clanking sounds. However, the train did not move at all, and kept moving forward at a steady speed. At the same time, it spouted more than a dozen fireballs at the enemies from one side of its body, turning them into beehives. Whether it was the demons or the demonic beasts, they could only be beaten passively, and could not fight back at all. It was like a moving city wall, providing the most reliable protection for the First Army wherever it went. Just thinking about it made Iron Axe excited. The soldiers who were in charge of guarding around the train began to murmur. However, this was not the most eye-catching part of the train. In addition to stabilizing the front line for the First Army, its ultimate goal was to destroy the Tequila ruins and those tower-like skeletal monsters. Therefore, large-caliber cannons were necessary. At this moment, these 2 deadly weapons were placed in the second and fourth carriages. Although they were still equipped with 152 mm longsong cannons, according to His Majesty, the barrels of these cannons were longer and had more charges. The difference could be seen with the naked eye. One cannon took up almost all the space in the carriage, and even a machine gun could not fit inside. The tail of the cannon was also surrounded by a huge iron shell, which was even wider than the body of the carriage. In this way, even if the demons attacked from the air, the artillerymen could not interrupt the shooting. The only thing that worried Iron Axe was that although this new encirclement design was extremely safe, it also added a lot of weight and volume, which made the train feel quite top-heavy. In particular, the cannons needed to be adjusted when shooting. If the whole carriage rotated, could the train withstand the fierce impact when firing? Your Majesty. A soldier trotted to the king and saluted. All personnel are ready. Please give the order. This is a weapon that has yet to be officially installed. Whether it is maintenance or improvement, it is the responsibility of the engineering department. Roland smiled and shook his head. So, I'm not the one in charge of the test today. It's the Minister of Engineering. You should report to her. Only then did Iron Axe notice that the Queen had also attended the test, but compared to the other witches, she was dressed in a work uniform, so he did not recognize her at first sight. Your Highness the Queen. The soldier stammered. He bowed to Anna again. All personnel are ready. I understand, Anna replied calmly. Let them start the test. Yes. The reporter shouted at the train. Activate the cannon. This little episode made everyone smile in understanding, but it did not affect the test at all. Following the command, the alarm echoed over the forest for a while. Woo! Woo! Iron Axe immediately looked back at the train. When he heard the creaking sound of the capstan, he was surprised to find that the body of the train had changed. 2 thick iron legs unfolded under the second and fourth carriages. Before this, he had thought they were just insignificant baffles. It was not until they were completely unfolded that Iron Axe realized that it was a set of independent machinery. A flat iron plate was fixed at the end of the iron legs. When it fell into the snow, it even slightly propped up the carriage, like the long leg of a giant spider. Isn't this what a deformed demon looks like? Did His Majesty get this inspiration from the enemy and use it on a new weapon? But in any case, the pure metal combination did not look evil at all. Instead, it was full of majestic momentum. When these iron legs were completely fixed, the cannons finally pointed to the sky and made the first roar. In the violent tremors and airflow, the black beast did not move at all, as if it had solidified into the earth. It seems that the effect is good. Roland took off his earplugs and nodded approvingly at Anna. Long before loading the train, these subsystems had been tested many times. This time, it was just to verify the integrated system's performance, so it was not surprising that the first shot was successful. In fact, compared to the armored train's firepower unit and power unit, he valued the 4 supporting legs under the gun seat more. This could be regarded as the first practical test of a hydraulic device. According to Pascal's principle, the pressure on a closed liquid was equal in all directions. Therefore, in a U-shaped tube with unequal cross-section area, only a small force was needed to squeeze the small cross-section area to transmit a much larger force to the large cross-section area. Because of this magnifying effect, hydraulic devices have a wide range of applications, from manual pressure jacks to pumping control machine tools. It can be seen everywhere. The only difficulty was the processing and sealing, but for the current Neverwinter, there were no technical difficulties. The train was loaded with a set of hydraulic support equipment controlled by an electric motor. 2 steam-powered locomotives, one pushing and the other pulling, drove the armored train at a speed of more than 40 kilometers per hour. Next were 2 rows of artillery units, with 15 rounds of ammunition in the turret, which made the armored train look particularly large. In the middle was the ammunition loading vehicle, which was also the power source of the entire train. One dawn I could meet the needs of 2 hydraulic pumps, lighting, and ventilation in the train. These 5 carriages formed the most basic armored train unit. If speed was not the goal, new carriages could be added to the front and back of the train, such as a troop carrier or a sentry vehicle with more powerful suppressive firepower. This was also the charm of the armored train. By changing the trailer, a variety of tactical weapons could be assembled. Amidst the exclamations of the crowd, Edith walked towards him with a smile. In this way, the most important part of the plan to attack Tequila has been completed, she said with a hand on her chest. Does this new weapon have a name? Roland thought for a moment and said, let's call it Black River. Black River? Edith rolled her eyes. It corresponds to the demon's bloodline? Roland could not help but smile. That's right. In areas where the red mist could not cover, the demons had once transported hundreds of crisscrossing red mist bloodlines to maintain the frontline outposts. These lines were not only their lifelines, but also the bloody lines that the Union was extremely afraid of. Now there would be another color of lifelines on the fertile plains. Chapter 1050. Knock knock knock. Not long after dawn, there was a knock on the door of the mud hut. Good, are you up? We should go now. I'll be ready soon. Good drank the last mouthful of hot porridge, wiped his mouth, and looked at the girl who was still busy making the bed. Then I'll go. She looked up and asked, you really don't need me to go with you? I've told you many times that you're too young. There won't be a job suitable for you. Good said impatiently. Stop. I know you're going to talk about what happened in the kingdom of Wolfheart again, but do you still want to do that kind of work? Stay here. I'll bring back delicious food for you at noon. The girl's eyes lit up. Popcorn. That's too expensive. I like egg pancakes. Or do you not like flowing heart eggs that are fried until both sides are brown? Gulp. She swallowed her saliva. So don't run around. Do you understand? Good reminded her one last time. By the way, what's your name? Rachel. What should you call me? She was a little hesitant, but she finally replied, Bro. Brother. Very good. Don't let it slip. Good tightened the sackcloth around his neck, pushed the door open and walked out of the mud hut. The warm air was immediately chased away by the cold wind, and winter returned to its familiar look. Even so, the scene in front of him was full of vitality and vitality. Row after row of mud houses stretched out like waves surging on the snowy ground. Looking up, One could see the smoke of cooking and the swaying silhouettes of people everywhere. The city in the distance was faintly discernible in the smoke, as if it was still in a deep sleep, while this place across the river had already woken up. The people who knocked on the door were Uncle Baggy and Senko, who lived next door. Standing dozens of steps away, they urged. "What are you waiting for? Hurry up." "Coming." He closed the door and ran toward them on the snow. The temporary residence was about 2 miles away from the center of Neverwinter. The three of them had to get to the central square before the new job was announced. Fortunately, a solid stone road had been built along the banks of the Redwater River, so even if it was covered with snow, it was still very safe to walk on it. There was no need to worry about the mountain road that needed to be explored step by step, so they could reach it in about a quarter of an hour. Soon, there were more people around them. The scale of the temporary residential area was beyond imagination. Good had not even seen the end of it. According to the uncle next door, the mud huts used to be built in the city, but as the population increased, the hills were all moved out of the city. Because it was expanded every year, no one knew how many immigrants it had accommodated. However, there was one thing that was certain. Most of the people who had gathered on the stone path from their residences were there for their new jobs. "Have you thought about what you want to do next?" Baggy asked. "It should be something easier, like sweeping the snow and de-icing." Senko said, holding the back of his head. "Time is short, money is fast. If you work for 1 day, you can feed yourself for 2 days. At least you don't have to worry about starvation this winter. Of course, that's assuming there aren't any better ways to limit recruitment." Limited recruitment referred to those special jobs that required a limited number of people and had a certain threshold, but the pay was also much higher. This city was full of all kinds of strange rules. For example, all employment announcements were related to the administrative office instead of individuals. The officials would update the announcement once a week, and it could be for hundreds of people. Such a scale and efficiency could be said to have reshaped Good's understanding of the city. However, there was no lack of surprises here. Compared to the other inconceivable wonders, this was nothing. Basically, all the recruitment was divided into 3 categories. In addition to the limited recruitment, the other 2 categories were short-term recruitment and formal recruitment. The latter had a much broader pay and job scope. Unfortunately, it required either an ID card or a primary diploma. Immigrants like them could only choose short-term jobs to fill their stomachs. Senko's choice was reasonable. Although the easy jobs did not have high pay, they could save energy to attend primary education classes. If they could pass the assessment, they could obtain the status of formal residents. "What about you?" Senko looked at him. "The pay is high," Good shrugged. "It doesn't matter if I'm tired." Because he still had a mouth to feed. As a new refugee who had just moved to Neverwinter this winter, he was already very lucky to have a small house to shelter him from the wind and rain. As for moving into a beautiful residential area where he could have a meal of meat every week, he did not have such extravagant hopes for the time being. The only thing that made Good feel a little regretful was that the administrative office had set a minimum age limit, 16 years old. Rachel would have to work for another 2 years to meet the requirements. Now that he had finally escaped from the fire pit, he would not let her fall into it again. "Don't overwork yourself," Baggy reminded him. "It's freezing outside. It's not cheap to go to the hospital." "Don't worry, I'm very healthy." Good patted his chest. He was not bragging. He had almost been selected as a squire of the night, if he had not been born in a poor family. "Uncle, what are you going to do?" "I'm not going to choose anything. I'm just here to accompany you." Senko was stunned. It was Good who reacted quickly. "Have you already?" "Haha, that's it." Baggy laughed foolishly. "The foreman of the 6th engineering team has taken a liking to me and plans to recruit me into the official team. The new contract should be sent to me in 2 days." "That's really great." Senko came to his senses. "If you're officially recruited, your salary will almost double, right? Then you'll be able to save up the down payment and get an ID card. Then you'll become a real resident of Neverwinter. If you ask me to study again, I'm sure I won't be interested." Baggy waved his hand. "Besides, I've been here for almost 2 years. I can only say that I'm too stupid to see an opportunity now. You're so young, so you'll definitely have more opportunities than me. Some people around them heard their conversation and came over to congratulate them. The road became lively for a while. This made Good a little puzzled. In his opinion, getting an ID card was just a way to get a better job, but these people seemed to be the opposite. It was not important to become a subject of a lord or king, but in their conversation, it seemed that it was a great thing to be proud of, even more important than the job itself. While chatting along the way, the three of them arrived at the Square of Neverwinter. A group of people had already gathered here, but most of them were residents of the city and did not compete with the refugees in the temporary residential area. The new announcement was posted on the south side of the square. From time to time, a kid walked up to Good and the others and asked, "Do you need a substitute reader? It's only 10 copper royals." "No, we can read," Baggy replied with a smile. Of course, among the three of them, only Senko could read, but he could not read all of them. Tisk, these guys. If they have the time, why don't they find a formal job? Good muttered in a low voice. The salary is much higher than these copper royals. They're all students of the academy. I guess they haven't reached the working age yet. Senko looked around and said, "What?" "Well, I heard it when I was on the night shift." He lowered his voice. In order to prove the importance of knowledge, the teachers often encourage them to use what they've learned to find opportunities to make money. It seems that this practice has greatly increased the number of students in the academy. If I didn't have to work during the day, I'd like to try it. That works? Good glanced at the substitute readers who were running around. Most of them were children. If he remembered correctly, Rachel could read a little. Maybe she could do it. Hey, look over there. The uncle suddenly pointed to a corner at the south end of the square. A lot of people are gathering there. Good and Senko looked at each other. Is it a limited recruitment? Come on, let's go and have a look. The three of them immediately ran to the place where the crowd gathered. To their surprise, there was not only a tent, but also a narrator. After listening to the narrator, Good could not help but feel happy. There was indeed a limited recruitment here, and the conditions were very lenient. They did not need to be literate, nor did they need an ID card. The only requirement was that they had to be physically fit and pass a series of relevant tests. Although he did not understand what those strange tests meant, as long as it was a competition of physical fitness, he was confident. Chapter 1051. There was a hubbub in the crowd. The army had always only chosen official residents, and the conditions were getting stricter and stricter. It was only during the battle for the throne that everyone was recruited. Why did it suddenly open today? Even Good, a new immigrant, had heard the uncle mention how generous the army was. As long as he joined the first army, he would not have to worry about food and clothing for the rest of his life. Not only would he be provided with food and clothing, but he would also receive a pension after his death. His family would also benefit. Moreover, they would not only eat oatmeal and pancakes, but also fish fillets, jerky, and butter, which were all common and unlimited. Apart from the possibility of losing his life, it was almost a perfect job. No, it was a perfect job. If he could exchange it for so much, how much was his life worth? Good had been exiled from the kingdom of Wolfheart to Grey Castle, and had seen too much suffering and disaster. Groups of people had died by the roadside like animals, and crows had danced merrily on them, enjoying the feast. Sometimes, life was not much better than grass. Moreover, the Church of Hermes, which had conquered most of the kingdom of Wolfheart, had been defeated by the king of Grey Castle. Joining this powerful and mysterious army might be safer than being a squire of the night. It was also good to join the second army. Although the conditions were not as good, and he might be sent to other cities, it was safer, and he had never heard of any losses. In other words, if he could be selected by the army, no matter which army he was assigned to, it could be regarded as the best way out for outsiders like him. Good and Senko were both excited. They looked at Baggy and said, "Uncle." Baggy also seemed a little hesitant. After thinking for a while, he said with a wry smile, "I'd better not go. The foreman must have spent a lot of effort to hire me. I can't break this agreement first. It's just the registration. It's not certain whether you'll be accepted or not, Senko advised. You can wait for the results before making a decision. I'm afraid I won't be able to refuse by then. Baggy shook his head. You go ahead. I'll wait for your good news in the square. Senko wanted to say something, but Gudra grabbed his shoulder and said, line up. He looked back and finally nodded. Then let's go apply first. Since many of the applicants were illiterate, the scene was a little chaotic. After registering, he was taken aside by the black-clothed guards and separated from the crowd. At the same time, more and more residents came to apply for the recruitment. The announcer had to close the registration channel and loudly announced that the recruitment would continue the next day. Even so, the crowd did not disperse for a long time. Many people stood around the tent and seemed to want to see what kind of assessment was. Good could not help but rejoice that he had not arrived too late today. On the other side, some people had already entered the tent under the guidance of the guards. He noticed that although this tent was close to 100 paces wide, enough to hold all the applicants, no more than 10 people entered at a time. This meant that the exam might be more complicated and difficult than he had imagined. Sure enough, not long after, a mournful scream came from the tent, causing the expressions of the applicants waiting outside to suddenly become serious. This. Senko shrank his neck. Is it a test of how well they can take a beating? If he's being tortured, the screams should be continuous, Good said in a low voice. Such continuous screams suggest that he's suffering from some kind of shock. Is it? You know so much. Because I have no lack of experience in beating people up or being beaten up. He exhaled softly. I also heard it from others. After a while, the sound of vomiting came from the tent again. Everyone's face turned pale. What is the test this time? Good was speechless. It would be a miracle if he could guess it. When the first batch of candidates was brought out, his heart skipped a beat. Only 1 out of 10 people stayed in the tent. Did that mean the elimination rate was as high as 90%? And why were their footsteps so weak? It was as if they couldn't even stand stably. At least, judging from their figures, these people shouldn't be too weak. But he had no time to think about why. The guard called his name. Good. Yes, sir. Good clenched his fists and strode into the tent. The space inside was not large, and it seemed to be divided into several areas by the curtain. According to the order of entry, the group of people sat down in front of a man in a military uniform. But the bench was a little strange. One had to stand on tiptoe to sit on it, and it was very shaky, as if it was deliberately making people uncomfortable. What made him feel a little relieved was that Senko was also in this team. I am the examiner of this project, the man in the military uniform said. You don't need to know my name, because most of you will be eliminated soon. Even if you pass all the tests, you will just take the first step. If you want to join the army, you still have a lot to learn. So is he selecting the second army? Or a reserve army that is newer than the second army? Good thought. But no matter what it was, as long as the pay could make him and Rachel better, he had to give it a try. Now I will announce the rules, the man continued. Everyone put your feet on the pedal, and keep it there for 5 minutes. No matter what you see, don't fall off the stool. Of course, if your feet touch the ground, you will fail. Then get ready to start. Everyone could not help but look at each other. That's it. The officer sneered and did not answer. Instead, he closed the curtain around them. Then a strange white light swallowed Good. When he came to himself, he found that he was floating in the air. Suddenly, he heard a scream, and at the same time, there was a dull sound of something hitting the ground. This caused a lot of panic. Even Good subconsciously wanted to move his hands and feet, trying to escape the fate of being smashed to pieces. But the slight shaking under his body made him instantly wake up. He was still sitting on the stool, but the worst was yet to come. He did not float for long. Soon the surrounding clouds began to rise, which meant that he was falling. The feeling of falling to the ground at high speed was almost indescribable. Good felt his heart almost jump out of his throat. His brain was warning him of extreme danger, but his reason was telling him that there was an invisible stool under his butt. Under the impact of the two contradictory thoughts, The last thing that appeared in his mind was Rachel's face. After the white light dissipated, the scene in the tent returned to his sight. Not bad. The officer clapped his hands. You have passed the first test, and your results are much better than the previous group. But there are still a few more tests. I hope you can persist until the end. This is the first test? Good swallowed and found that his hands were trembling violently. His back was cold, as if he had just climbed out of the water. Damn it. That was not the end of the fall. After that, his vision climbed and dived several times, and he even skimmed over the steep rock walls along the mountain ridges, as if he could hit the mountain rocks at any time. Simple? He could not help but think of the officer's sneer. No, it was already a blessing from God that he could still sit in his original position. Chapter 1052. Did he fall to the ground out of fear, or was he knocked down by someone? If he did not know which direction to go, it was possible for him to knock someone down in a panic. After all, everyone's position was not scattered, and it took a bit of luck to persist until the end. Good did not know whether to feel lucky or disappointed. It was true that the fewer the competitors, the higher the chance. However, he had to face the next test alone. Before he could think too much, the officer had already brought the qualified candidates to another compartment. The second test field was also not big. There were still 10 chairs placed in the middle, but this time, the chairs were in a different form. They were arranged in a circle and fixed to a large iron ring. There was a bracket under the iron ring, which seemed to be able to rotate freely. Sit down according to the order, the examiner said expressionlessly. The rules of the second round are similar to the previous round. Sit firmly and persist until the end. This time, no one dared to say it was easy. Everyone carefully climbed onto the iron ring and sat down according to their number. With the start of the test, 2 soldiers who had been guarding the place in advance came forward and held the handles on the back of the chairs to push the ring. As Good had expected, the ring slowly rotated with the chairs. At first, no one reacted. However, as the speed increased, a sense of discomfort quickly welled up in them. However, the soldiers had no intention of stopping. Instead, under the command of the officer, they pushed the ring even harder. For a moment, only the creaking sound of the chairs could be heard in the tent. Good's vision became increasingly blurred. The world was spinning. That was the only feeling left in his mind. He had not fully recovered from the effects of the illusion in the first round. The strong dizziness made his stomach churn, and the acid almost rushed to the root of his tongue. What kind of test is this? Are all the soldiers recruited by the army monsters? He gritted his teeth and tried to look at the soldiers who were pushing the iron ring, but he found that they were deliberately looking at the ceiling, trying to avoid looking directly at the iron ring. They were just repeating simple movements with their hands, and they were not affected by the rotation. This is not fair, he shouted in his heart. And that person only said to persist until the end, but not the specific time. If he had to rotate for an hour, he was afraid that he would faint in the chair. The act of focusing his eyes intensified the dizziness in his head. Good could no longer suppress the acid in his stomach. He opened his mouth and directly spat it out. Wretch! The sour stench immediately rushed into his nostrils. Like a chain reaction, his vomiting caused the others to vomit as well. The smell in the tent became extremely horrible, and there were even some splashes of juice and half-digested matter stuck to his face. I can't do it anymore. Stop. Stop. Ugh, I can't take it anymore. Good finally knew why he had heard the sounds of vomiting outside the tent. Isn't this a bit too much? More importantly, what's the point of this test? Was this really a recruitment for the army, and not a deliberate trick on them? Every breath was so difficult that he felt that he might give up at any time. But even when the iron ring finally stopped, he did not loosen his grip on the back of the chair. There were 3 participants left. A rare look of approval appeared on the officer's face. Well done. You're one step closer to passing. Rest for 5 minutes. From the 3rd round onwards, the difficulty will gradually decrease. You just have to deal with it seriously. But now no one would believe the officer's words. Everyone acted as if they were facing a formidable enemy. After wiping their faces with their sleeves, They walked into the next compartment with sullen faces. But this time, Good found that the officer was not lying. The third test was to crawl into a hollow ring and roll it from one end of the tent to the other. No one was eliminated. The fourth test was to flip through a set of strange pictures. The pictures were filled with similar color blocks, and they had to point out the animal patterns hidden in them. Again, all of them passed. The doubts in Good's heart grew stronger. The fifth test was to strip naked for a full-body examination. The sixth test was to point out the direction of an arrow on a piece of glowing glass. Even though everyone's performance was different, the result was still a pass. Just as he was waiting for the next test, the officer brought the three of them out of the tent. Only then did Good realize that there was another small tent at the back door of the main tent. Black uniformed guards surrounded the area, as if there was someone important inside. "Sir, where?" Someone could not help but ask. The officer raised the corner of his mouth. "I forgot to congratulate you. The test is over. You've passed the preliminary selection. Just wait here. Someone will take care of you later." "Is this just the preliminary selection?" Then the salary stated in the announcement. Good suddenly stopped halfway through his question. Oh no, the army would definitely not welcome people who only came for the salary, just like the knight who always talked about honor. If he said it in such a hurry, the officer would probably think that he was a greedy person. However, the officer did not show any displeasure. Instead, he looked at him seriously and asked, "Do you need the money?" It's nothing. After all, everyone in Neverwinter knows that the First Army's salary is high. In fact, I joined the army because of this." The officer shrugged and said, "The answer is yes." The education allowance, living allowance, and salary stated in the announcement will be paid truthfully. The subsequent screening will determine how far you can go, and it will not be used as an excuse to deduct your pay. As I said before, if you want to truly become a member of the army, you still have a lot to learn. Good suddenly felt a great sense of happiness. He was selected. The salary that was higher than Uncle Baggy's and the allowance that was enough to support him and Rachel had all become a reality. In an instant, the suffering he had suffered in the tent was nothing. When he recalled it, he even felt a trace of sweetness. Thank you, sir." He bowed excitedly and said, "I'll strive to join the First Army as soon as possible." The other two were also excited, and they mimicked him and bent down. "But there's one more thing I want to tell you. Indeed, many people came to the army with the idea of high salary, but it's not the salary that makes them stay." The officer smiled indifferently. "There are more things worth pursuing here. When the time comes, you'll find that the initial desire is not worth mentioning at all." He paused for a moment, as if remembering something worthy of nostalgia. "Well, there are still many people waiting for the assessment. Let's talk later if there's a chance." It turned out that the officer was not a cold and reticent person. Good's heart skipped a beat. "Sir, since we've passed the assessment, can you tell us your name now?" "My name is Van Ur." After saying this, the officer turned around and walked into the tent. After that, qualified people came out of the tent one after another and joined the waiting line. The recruitment did not come to an end until the afternoon. Good counted and found that a total of 16 reserve soldiers had been selected on this day. The guards crowded around them, sandwiched them in the middle, and entered the last tent together. The furnishings inside were very simple. There was nothing but a long table, but the guards seemed a little nervous. Good felt that the people around him were breathing faster. "Oh, these are the knight candidates they selected?" The tall man standing beside the table looked at them with interest, his eyes full of scrutiny. Good's heart suddenly trembled. What did he say? Knight? Did the First Army want to recruit a knight? How could this be possible? That was a title that only the children of the nobility could have. With his identity, he could not even be selected as a squire. Empty knight? I know it's my brother's idea. Then a gentle female voice came into his ears. But they're still far from this step. Let's take it slow. By the way, all of you go to the side and leave the space in the middle to them. But the leading guard hesitated. It's okay. I have someone behind me to protect me. Yes, Your Highness. Your Highness. Before Good could figure out what was going on, The figure in front of him flashed, and an astonishingly beautiful woman came into view. She had a pair of eyes as bright as gemstones, and her face was more flawless than snow. Just one look at her would be unforgettable. If he could, he almost wanted to stare at her forever. But he quickly forced himself to look away and respectfully lowered his head. The woman's long and graceful gray hair revealed her identity. Even a new immigrant like him knew what hair color represented. It was the symbol of the royal family of Grey Castle. In Neverwinter, there was only one woman with such a bloodline. It was His Majesty's sister, Tilly Wimbledon. Your Highness. Chapter 1053. Get up, Tilly said calmly. I know you must be full of doubts right now. Why did the army make an exception to recruit non-official residents? Why did the screening criteria are so strange? And why did I have to explain it to you? In fact, these questions sound complicated, but once you experience it, you will find it very simple. So I won't go into detail here. I'll just mention a few points. First of all, you will not be joining the First Army or the Second Army, but a new army that my brother intends to build. It will be different from any other army, so the screening criteria will be more special. This caused a small commotion. There was no doubt that the new army would have a wider path of promotion and would be less likely to be ostracized. For people like them who did not have the slightest foundation, being able to develop in a brand new army was obviously the best choice. Even a fool would be able to understand this. But you can only be regarded as reserve personnel now. The princess continued. It's because it's so different that I don't have anything to refer to. This means that I have to start from scratch, and the difficulties I'll encounter will be beyond imagination. If you have to compare it, the difficulty of your previous assessment is not worth mentioning. Now there are 16 people standing here, but I'm afraid only 1 or 2 can become an empty knight, or none. Good could not help but gasp. He was not surprised by how difficult it was, but by the first half of the princess's sentence. It really is a knight. Although he did not know the difference between an empty knight and a traditional knight, it was incredible that an ordinary person from a poor family could get this opportunity. As for extremely difficult, isn't that reasonable? He felt his heart suddenly burning. But what shocked him even more was, in addition, because in this city, no, in this world, only my brother and I really understand what the new army is, and Roland can't be distracted too much. I will be responsible for teaching you. This sentence was like a thunderbolt, and Good was stunned. Her Highness will teach them personally? In other words, they will have the opportunity to become a knight conferred by the Princess of Grey Castle? Even if they did not have a fief and were no longer nobles, it was still a great honor, especially for new immigrants like him who had nothing. The others weren't any calmer either. If they were not afraid of being rude in front of the Emperor and making the princess annoyed, they would have already cheered out loud. The rapid breathing around him was the best proof of this. The training of all qualified candidates will be concentrated in New Shallow Beach. You will receive new residences and official identities, and henceforth become a part of the new King's City. Tilly pressed her hand down. But remember, even if you're a reserve, you're still part of the army. Your movements will be restricted. If you withdraw halfway, you will be regarded as a deserter. Any action that violates military orders will be severely punished. Do you understand? Yes, Your Highness. Even though they were a little absent-minded by the princess's stern warning, so much so that their replies were not loud and clear, no one showed any signs of regret. Very good. Lastly, it's time to swear an oath to the King of Grey Castle. Tilly looked at the tall man at the table. Vader. The latter put his hand on his chest and nodded. Then he took out a roll of white paper from his pocket and spread it open. Now, I will read one sentence, and all of you will read after me. The content of the oath was simple and easy to understand. It was even too straightforward. For example, this sentence. I have no ill intentions towards His Majesty, nor do I have any hostility towards witches. Who would dare? Remembering that Her Royal Highness was also a witch, Good unconsciously raised his voice to the maximum, as if he could not show his loyalty if he lowered his voice even a little. After the oath, The guards came forward and distributed the packages to them. From this moment on, you're a member of the army. Tilly smiled. The first round of recruitment is expected to last about a week, and then the training will officially begin. The contents in the packages are what you need to learn and master first. When Good returned to the central square, the sky was already dark. The people who came to recruit had already dispersed, and the uncle and Senko were nowhere to be seen. This was expected. No one had expected the assessment to take so long. They still had to take care of their families, so it was impossible for them to stay in the square all the time. At this moment, he could not care too much. He held the packages tightly in his arms and ran to the temporary residential area as fast as he could. Joy reverberated in his heart, and his body seemed to be filled with endless strength. Even if the cold wind blew against his face, he could not feel a trace of cold. The snow under his feet made splashing sounds, and the road, which had been trampled by thousands of people, was like a dark brown road sign. Perhaps it would be covered by snow tomorrow, but now it was pointing the way home. He went into the low and warm mud house, where Rachel was cooking oatmeal. Sorry, I came back late today. I know, the girl interrupted crisply. The uncle next door told me that you found a good job, right? Before he could answer, the girl had already reached out her right hand to him. Where's the delicious food? What? Hey, you said you'd bring me egg pancakes. Rachel pouted discontentedly. Damn it, I actually forgot about it. Good quickly added. Next time you can eat one every week. No two. Rachel was doubtful. Really? Of course, it's not an ordinary job. I even met Her Highness. Good took off his wet shoes, rolled up half of his trousers, and moved closer to the stove. Then he carefully took out the package from his pocket. Look, this is what she gave me. What's in it? For a moment, the girl's curiosity overwhelmed her dissatisfaction for missing their appointment. I don't know. Let's open it and see. Good untied the tie and could not help but be slightly stunned. This is books, Rachel answered. He took out all the things inside and found that it was a stack of books. The covers were printed with different pictures, which looked very beautiful, but he could not understand a single word. Can you help me see what they are? At this time, he could only ask Rachel for help. The girl smiled proudly. I can't guarantee that I can recognize all of them. Well, this one is reading and writing. Skills, that one is common. Vocabulary. Shorthand, the third one is. So these are the things that Senko learned. The pictures on the covers turned out to be another summary of the content. For example, there was a goose feather pen printed on reading and writing skills, and there were three-dimensional letters of all sizes on vocabulary shorthand. For some reason, Good was slightly disappointed. He had thought that the books would contain rewards from Her Highness to those who passed the test. They did not need to be very expensive. Even if it was just a scroll, it would at least be a symbol of honor. If it were someone else, he would probably start to laugh at him for daydreaming. How could Her Highness give him such elementary education textbooks that could be found everywhere? However, Good quickly recovered. Since he wanted to become a knight, he naturally could not be illiterate. He really had a lot to learn. At this moment, the cover of a book attracted Good's attention. He had never seen the thing in the picture before. It looked like a huge kite, but also like a big bird spreading its wings. It had 4 pairs of wings, and was many times larger than a human. The woman sitting on it, and controlling it, looked very much like Her Royal Highness. The ocean shimmered beneath her feet, and the continent that should have been vast and boundless had become a corner of the world. This view was exactly the same as what he had seen in the first round of the assessment. Good felt that his breathing slowed down for a moment. Rachel, what's written in this book? Chapter 1054. A week later, Tilly brought a roster to Roland's desk in his office. How was it? Did the recruitment go well? Roland poured a cup of tea for her, and inquired about her well-being. Facing this nominal sister, he had always felt a lingering sense of guilt. Unlike Anna, who took the initiative to tell him, Tilly was the first person to see through him that he was not Prince Roland. Although Princess Tilly subconsciously protected him when the flying demons attacked Neverwinter, which made him understand that she had completely accepted him as an ally. The guilt in his heart did not lessen at all. After all, he was the one who occupied Prince Roland's body. At first, he had planned to unreasonably confirm his brother's identity, but when Tilly did not pursue the matter, he felt a little uncomfortable. Of course, thinking about it was just thinking about it. He would not bring it up again and again. Those who wanted to get an answer in the end would mostly die on the way. He was very clear about this. Except for the number of people, everything else is going well. Tilly took the teacup and gently blew on it. We selected 124 people from the immigrants and 73 official residents, which adds up to less than 200. I'm afraid such a small number of people won't be of much help when fighting against the demons. It's always difficult at the beginning, Roland said as he opened the name list. Once we have a good example, we'll be able to attract more people in the second round of recruitment. By then, it won't just be a matter of Neverwinter. Although people had different visions, the yearning for the vast space was engraved in their bones. From the moment civilization sprouted, people began to look up at the starry sky. Whether it was imitating birds or using balloons, the exploration of the blue sky was not exclusive to the era of aircraft. The explorers of the Society of Wondrous Crafts were the best examples, so he was not worried about the attractive ability of the Air Force. The first thing he needed to do was to prepare a team that could fly. However, he knew that it was not easy to train a pilot. In an era when the flight control system was still immature, the most important thing for a pilot was talent. Acrophobia, anti-dizziness, body coordination, and other tests were only the most basic requirements. Things like spatial orientation, understanding of aircraft, and even nerve reaction speed all determined whether a person was suitable to be a pilot or not. The veterans of the First Army were very obedient and reliable. It was possible to select a small number of outstanding people to serve as corps officers, but it would be difficult to transfer them all to form the Air Force. This was also the reason why he expanded the screening to include the new migrants. One's level of culture and theory could be nurtured later on, but if one didn't have talent, then one didn't have it. Instead of forcing people to bite the bullet and ascend to the heavens, it was better to find more talented people. According to the statistics, more than 3,000 people signed up in a week, and after screening, only about 200 qualified. From the looks of it, it was a wise move to include temporary residents in the scope of consideration from the beginning. Flipping to the last page of the roster, Roland could not help but exclaim, "There are still 6 people who didn't pass the oath." Because of their duplicity, they were taken away by Vader for interrogation, Nightingale replied. 2 of them are official residents of Neverwinter. Roland frowned. In theory, this was not something to make a fuss about. It was common for people to change their minds. They could go from being honest to being evil in the blink of an eye. He did not expect these people to stay the same forever. But when it really happened, he still felt an involuntary sense of disappointment. They could have followed him into a better new era. They could have even seen the threshold of the new era. But in the end, they gave it up at the threshold. Did you find out the reason? I wanted to report to you after a thorough investigation, Nightingale said lazily. They were all bribed by foreign merchants in the hope of infiltrating the army to get more information about firearms. The police department was dispatched, but they only caught the merchant's assistant who stayed in the hotel. So I asked Summer to backtrack and found a letter from the old king's city in the illusion. Judging from the content, the mastermind seems to be a noble. Anyway, now we know his whereabouts, appearance, and identity. Soroya's portrait has also been sent to Theo through the animal messenger. I don't think he can escape for long. Hearing this, Roland could not help laughing, and his previous unhappiness was swept away. Faced with such an unreasonable investigation mode, the rebels were really pitiful. Oh, is there a problem? Nightingale blinked. No, you did a good job. Roland suppressed the corner of his mouth. Since they don't want to give up, the North Slope mine won't complain that there are too many people. It seemed that the old nobles had not completely given up. As long as he showed a little flaw, these people would come back from the ashes. However, this did not surprise him. After all, the nobles had been in theft for nearly 1,000 years, and they still existed in the other 3 kingdoms. It was impossible to make them disappear overnight. Well, Tilly coughed twice and brought the topic back to business. The problem of the people has been solved. Where's the plane? This problem. By the way, Evelyn recently made a batch of excellent chaos drinks. Do you want to try it? Oh no. Tilly came to her senses instantly. We're talking about the plane. Don't tell me you haven't even made a prototype? Bullseye. Anyway, they have to learn to read in basic theories. If it's just a demonstration, the glider is also. No, Tilly interrupted righteously. Even if it's a glider, the modified version will be completely different from the previous one, not to mention a brand new plane. If I haven't even tried to operate it myself, how can I teach others? Those students are indeed far from flying, but I have to spend at least a month in advance to thoroughly understand its performance and make corresponding adjustments to the flight manual, not including the time for subsequent improvement. Since you've entrusted this task to me, I naturally have the responsibility to urge you to complete your due work. It was the first time for Roland to see Princess Tilly being so serious. He could see that she was indeed very fond of this big toy that could both fly and match her own ability. The only problem was that Roland had underestimated the difficulty of making a complete plane. Even if it was an old biplane, even if it only had one more set of power and fuel equipment than a glider, the complexity was multiplied. Moreover, this was the result of a lot of information in the dream world. If he designed it alone, he might not even be able to finalize a finalized plan in a few years. I see. He shook his head helplessly. In half a month, I'll come up with a finished product that can fly. Then it's a deal. Tilly smiled. By the way, where's the excellent chaos drinks you mentioned? Please let me have a taste. Strange. Nightingale muttered in a low voice after Princess Tilly left with a whole bottle of chaos drinks. What's wrong? Roland asked. She's called you brother many times in public, but she rarely calls you that when she sees you alone. Isn't it strange? Is that so? He was stunned. But why? I don't know. Chapter 1055. On the northeast border of the Kingdom of Dawn, in the Cage Mountain area, the higher they went, the more difficult it became. There were intertwined vines and giant trees everywhere. The thick canopies overlapped each other, and they could only see a little gray sky through the gaps. The only thing that comforted Azima was that at least they did not have to fight against knee-deep snow. This place was less affected by the months of demons, so the mountain would not be blocked by heavy snow. If it was like the impassable mountain range, they could come again at the turn of spring and summer. However, this did not mean that it was easy to go through the deep mountains. When they stood at the foot of the mountain, the Cage Mountain was just a gentle slope, not even steep. But when they went in, they found that there was not even a small path, which was not suitable for a large group of people to climb. On the first day, they had climbed less than 2 miles, and 3 of them were injured. Sean, the king's personal guard, had no choice but to station the army in the small town at the foot of the mountain, and only select a few elites to continue with her. Naf, a local guide, rather, a god's punishment witch, and Mar, a liaison from the Tokat family, together with Sean and Azima, formed the whole team of this strange exploration team. It would be strange if it was not strange. The god's punishment witch said that she was entrusted by His Majesty to take care of her. After all, it was inconvenient for her to travel with men all day long. But Azima was sure that if she tried to escape, the god's punishment witch would break her legs immediately. Although Martokat was a liaison sent by the king of the Kingdom of Dawn, what was there to contact in the deep mountains and forests? Instead of staying in the town, he insisted on going up the mountain with them. Obviously, he had a purpose. If he had not been under the name of the Tokat family and helped a lot along the way, Sean would have thrown him back with a burlap bag. There was no need to even mention the prospecting team. This harmless prospecting team was armed to the teeth. Even their shovels could be used to cut people. When faced with the knights of certain lords, they looked like they would annihilate all of them with a single command. They did not look like a group of ordinary miners living at the bottom of society at all. None of them knew what they were looking for, including Azima. They were not looking for gold, silver, or copper. The only guide was the coin in her hand, which was made of an unknown material. Wait. The guide in front suddenly raised his hand and signaled for them to stop. Be careful, there's a trap here. Azima heard a series of clicking sounds behind her. She knew it was the sound of firearms being loaded. Over the past month or so, Sean had often talked to her about His Majesty's legendary achievements, and she had a basic understanding of the combat ability of this army. In fact, compared to Rother, who used to be a witch, she found that she preferred to stay with ordinary people. Rother, on the other hand, was much calmer. She did not even draw her sword as she slowly walked to the guide. Oh, is this a spear-throwing tripwire? Yes. Naf pointed to the top of a tree trunk. See? The spears are hidden there. If we accidentally touch the trap, those things will shoot us into sieves. Azima followed his finger and saw several sharpened wooden sticks sticking out of the branches and leaves. They seemed to be looking down at them coldly from a high place. If they fell on their bodies, they would definitely hurt their heads, necks, and other important parts. This was not a trap set by hunters, but more like a trap for people. Where's the trap? Sean asked in a low voice. You won't find them, said Naf, shaking his head. Every vine and twig under our feet could be part of a tripwire, and it would be difficult to destroy it completely unless we set the whole place ablaze. Then what should we do? Marl muttered. We have to take a detour, my lord. No, all of you step back, Rother suddenly said. Let me have a try. What did you say? Naf looked at the god's punishment, which in surprise. Hey, this is not a joke. However, before he finished speaking, the god's punishment which had slowly walked into the dangerous area. The weeds were so dense that it was impossible to see what was under their feet without cutting them down. Before they went far, Azima heard a bang as if something had been pulled off. Then there was a rustling sound in the treetops, like the hissing of a viper. The rope, which was hidden somewhere, was suddenly pulled taut, and the wooden stick on top of the tree shot out in one breath. At the same time, Rother also pulled out her long sword. It's over. The guide immediately closed his eyes as if he could not bear to see the woman die on the spot. However, Azima witnessed everything that happened next. The god's punishment, which held the hilt of her sword with both hands and swatted the sticks back one by one as if she were swatting flies. Most of the sticks were smashed by the huge force, but she did it with ease as if it did not take much effort at all. When the noise subsided, the grass around her was in a mess. So the trap is solved. Rother sheathed her sword and shrugged to the others. Let's go. After realizing what had happened, Naf was so scared that he fell to the ground. I knew you were all very capable and extraordinary. No wonder you're the big shots from the king's city. After the guide recovered from the shock, he immediately changed his story. Especially this warrior, his swordsmanship can be described as superb. Cut the crap, Rother interrupted. You'd better explain why there are such traps in the mountain. Those wooden sticks and spears are hardly effective against wild beasts, aren't they? This was also the question that Azima wanted to ask. It's indeed used to deal with people, Naf replied honestly. The higher we go up the mountain, the more traps there are. Therefore, Cage Mountain has another name, Trap Mountain. These things were left by the previous lords with the sole purpose of guarding against the Kingdom of Wolfheart. The Kingdom of Wolfheart? Sean repeated. Yes, this mountain extends almost from the seaside to the old holy city. It's a natural boundary between the two kingdoms. Because the terrain of the Kingdom of Dawn is lower, it's like being trapped in a cage. That's how Cage Mountain got its name, Naf explained. But the problem lies in the shape of the mountain. You should have noticed when you were at the foot of the mountain. The south side of Cage Mountain is like a gentle slope. It looks very high, but it's very easy to walk down. As a result, bandits, hunters, and refugees from neighboring countries often invade the border territory of the Kingdom of Dawn through Cage Mountain. At first, they just plunder resources in the mountain. Later, they simply ran into the villages to steal and rob, which made the people panic. The Lord also had a headache, so he simply thought of a way to solve the problem once and for all, which was to give up Cage Mountain. I see. Marl Tokat suddenly understood. Such a thing actually happened on the border. The Lord naturally didn't want to attract the king's attention, Naf continued. Besides, we're not like the poor people on the other side. They can't live without the mountain. We just need to change our way of living. After the mountain was sealed, the Lord sent people to plant fast-growing weeds and vines in it, and set a lot of traps. This custom has been passed down from generation to generation, and Cage Mountain has become what it is today. So you turned it into a real cage. Although it blocked the other side, it also imprisoned you, Ozima thought. If it were His Majesty Roland Wimbledon, he would definitely not choose to do this. Roland always looked into the distance. Even when he was giving her the task, he never focused on her. No, why should I think of him at this time? Ozima shook her head repeatedly. His Majesty is just the employer. I should finish the task quickly, and try to return to Doris and the others as soon as possible. As the guide said, they encountered several more traps later, but they basically did not work on the god's punishment witches. Just as night was about to fall, Ozima suddenly saw the green light on the coin suddenly flourish. Behind a dense forest, there was also a dazzling light source. There seemed to be countless light spots running back and forth between the two, forming a bright light bridge. This was the reaction of the source. She had finally found another source. However, when the exploration team followed Ozima's instructions and passed through the dense forest, they could not help but be stunned. It turned out to be an abandoned building half hidden in the mountainside. The dilapidated stone gate was so deep that they could not see the bottom. The pillars on both sides were engraved with strange symbols, which obviously proved that it was not natural. Ozima also widened her eyes in surprise. Didn't His Majesty say that she was looking for a strange ore? Chapter 1056. Oh, interesting. Rother said in a low voice. What did you say? Sean looked at her. What's interesting about it? It doesn't hurt to tell you, mortals. Rother grinned and said, the underground civilization has left relics all over the continent, so the tequila have studied them a lot. As for these symbols, she walked to the mottled pillar and brushed off the dust. They're not the characters they used, and they have nothing to do with the magic characters made by the Union. Isn't it interesting enough to think of the history of the Four Kingdoms? Ozima found that she did not understand at all. Although the meaning of each word was clear and unmistakable, she did not know what it meant when they were put together. To her relief, Marl, who was from a great noble family, and Naf, the local guide, also looked confused. They were not much better than her. Sean, on the other hand, revealed a thoughtful expression. I heard from His Majesty that the Four Kingdoms used to only have scattered villages and small towns, which could be regarded as the edge of the continent. The so-called history is that there is no history. If this relic is not left by the civilization of the Battle of Divine Will, then it means. At this point he suddenly froze. In the past, there used to be unknown alien races living here? We can't draw a conclusion yet, Rother said with interest. It's unknown whether the underground civilization will split into tribes and create different languages. We can only get more information if we go in and have a look. Lord Sean, there seems to be a stone tablet here. A soldier who was inspecting the stone gate suddenly shouted. It seems to have our characters written on it. They immediately gathered around the stone tablet. They saw a piece of granite lying among the weeds. It was covered with moss, and only one side of it had been polished. It was difficult to find it without a careful search. It took the soldier a long time to clean it up, and the carved words were revealed to them. The land cursed by the gods. Do not enter. You will die. After reading the warning clearly, Knave could not help but gasp in shock. Is this the legendary Temple of the Cursed? He stammered as he took 2 steps back. Sean and the gods' punishment which looked at each other and asked, do you know its origin? I've only heard about it from others. It happened more than 100 years ago. Naf stared at the dark hole and swallowed. Didn't the local lord set up many traps to stop the kingdom of Wolfheart from crossing the Cage Mountain? Legend has it that a team led by a knight encountered a mountain rain while carrying out a mission. This kind of rain came and went quickly, covering the sky and covering the earth. When it fell, it could make people dizzy. So, the knight ordered them to find shelter from the rain, and they happened to find a strange temple. Oh, Rother raised her eyebrows. Did they find treasures after they went in? And the villagers were driven by greed and stole the treasures, only to be cursed by the gods and die tragically? You've heard of it too? Naf was surprised. Pfft, Rother laughed. Mortals really haven't learned much. They've been doing this for hundreds of years, and it's still working. I bet this rumor was made up by the Lord in order to keep the treasures in the ruins to himself. As for those poor people, they were just used as evidence of the curse and were killed one by one. But they didn't die immediately. What? Rother frowned. The guide shrank his neck and replied cautiously. After almost 10 years, they all died one by one, including the knight. It said that they were in extreme pain when they died, and even the skin on their faces fell off, revealing pieces of rotten flesh. They look so hideous, and this is also the source of the curse. To prevent misfortune from spreading in the territory, the Lord ordered that no one was allowed to go near that area, so now no one knows its specific location. Are you sure? Rother walked to Naf and put her arm on his shoulder. Looking at the arm that was thicker than his thigh, the guide's face turned pale. I heard it from the tavern. I'm sure it's not a lie. My lady, if you don't believe me, you can ask someone else. If there's a problem, then the rumor itself must be wrong. If they died after so long, then it doesn't make sense that they were killed, Azima thought. Besides, if it was common for the knight to conspire with the Lord to frame the villagers, it was another thing to kill the knight as well. The latter was a noble. No matter how small his family was, he couldn't be executed without a trial. Is it really a curse from the gods? How about we go back to the town first and make our next move when we get more information? Marl Tokat, the liaison officer, suggested. Next move? Naf looked at Sean in disbelief. Did you come for the Temple of the Cursed from the beginning? No, it's just a coincidence. Rother let go of Naf. What do you think? As His Majesty's trusted guard, I don't think you'll run away, right? Of course, Sean replied calmly. Accomplishing His Majesty's task is the first priority. Now that the goal is right in front of us, there's no reason for us to turn back. Very well, then let's go in and meet the so-called gods. Rother grinned grimly. But we can't just go in without any precautions. Sean shook his head. In fact, His Majesty also mentioned that we might encounter danger when we get close to the source. He even foresaw this. Yes, Sean turned to Azima and said. After you left that night, His Majesty told me something alone. He said that we might encounter two situations. One is that the source is exposed on the surface. In that case, we don't need to do anything. We can just seal off the scene and report directly to Neverwinter. The other is that the source is located in an underground mine. The deeper the cave, the more dangerous it is. Therefore, if we encounter the second situation, we need to take precautions in advance. Although this isn't a mine, it fits all the characteristics of a mine. Then he snapped his fingers at the soldier. Bring the things here. The two of them quickly unloaded their luggage and took out 5 snow-white coats from within. Rother squatted down and curiously flipped through the coats. They're just ordinary leather coats. Not with a mask, Sean said. He picked up a coat and put it on. Azima found that this was the only way to describe it. The coat was seamless from top to bottom, and did not even have a button. It was more like a human-shaped pocket than a coat. After putting it on, only Rother's face was exposed. His hands and feet were wrapped in the coat, which looked very weird. Then he put on a transparent mask to fill the last gap. A fist-sized iron can was fixed in front of the mask, which looked like a pig's nose. Chapter 1057. The guide and the liaison immediately declined the invitation, especially the former, who had unknowingly moved away from the entrance. If not for the soldiers watching him, he would have run away. Rother, however, did not choose to wear the weird suit. I don't need it. I'll keep one as a backup. Are you sure? Sean frowned. The Scourge's resistance and self-healing ability are much stronger than that of ordinary people. Common demonic plagues and poisons don't work on us. I don't think a disease that can take a mortal 10 years to live can threaten the god's punishment body, which is the most common thing in the ruins. She shrugged and said, on the contrary, This kind of jumpsuit will make it difficult for me to move and lower my perception. Wearing it in an unknown place will undoubtedly tie my hands and feet. Besides, if we are really in a dilemma, having a spare set of clothes will make it easier for the people outside to come to our rescue, although the chances of that happening are very small. This was a very good reason. The gods' punishment witches could only perceive the environment with their sight and hearing, so they were very dependent on them. After hundreds of years of training, they could even judge the moisture and flexibility of the soil by the sound of their footsteps. Azima had already seen this on the way here. Because of this, a protective suit that only slightly covered the ears and eyes of an ordinary person would probably have a much more serious impact on the gods' punishment witches. But what if it really is a curse from the gods? Azima asked worriedly. Rather smiled, just like before, with the corners of her mouth curling into a ferocious smile. Let's not talk about whether a leather suit can resist the gods. If it really is a curse, let it come at me. I'd like to see what the gods can curse us with when millions of tequila people are buried on the fertile plains. I see. Sean nodded after a moment of silence. Let's go. Azima took a deep breath and followed the guard into the stone door. The inside of the ruins was not as wet as they had imagined. Sand seeped in from the entrance and occupied most of the space in the passage. At first, they had to bend their bodies to move forward, but as they went deeper, the passage gradually became wider. Although they were still descending, the slope had become much gentler. Under the illumination of the torch, he could see that the stone walls on both sides were severely damaged. Tree roots and plant vines had pried open the layers of brick cracks and extended in from the outside, blocking the passage in disorder. Rather, who was at the front, hacked and hacked with her axe, clearing a path for the others. Had it not been for the gods' punishment witches, it would have taken them more than half a day to get down the slope. It's true that this place has been abandoned for a long time, but it's not exactly like what Naf said. It's not closed because of the team's curse, Sean said suddenly. At least for a period of time, it should be frequented. What did you see? Rather asked curiously. There are torches on the wall. He pointed to the middle of the wall. The lines on the chiseled surface are much clearer than on the wall, which means that the two were formed a long time apart. If it's just a temporary shelter from the rain, they don't have to leave a torch on the wall every 10 steps, do they? There was no doubt that it was necessary to chisel the torches only when people needed to come and go frequently, and for a long time. As I said, as long as there are treasures, how can the local lord not be interested? Rather sneered. That mortal guide may not be lying, but the rumor itself has been altered. What I'm worried about is whether the thing His Majesty wants us to find is the treasure he mentioned. Sean said thoughtfully. If there are many sources, how many have been transported over the past 100 years, and where have they been transported to? According to His Majesty, that's the key to the creation of the glory of the sun. We can't let it fall into the hands of others. We can't come to a conclusion until Miss Azima takes us to the first source. Rather suddenly paused. I think we're not far from our goal. The soil under their feet finally receded, revealing the buried stone steps below. The group of people immediately sped up a lot. About half an hour later, the ground in front of them, which was illuminated by the torch, was suddenly swallowed by darkness, as if there was a black wall that isolated everything. That's, Azima said in surprise. A big hole. Rather walked into the darkness with the torch in her hand, and immediately disappeared without a trace. Sean followed her. Please watch your step, the soldier in charge of guarding the rear reminded. Okay. Azima took a deep breath and walked into the darkness. Before she agreed to His Majesty's request, she always thought that she was brave. But now it seemed that she was not as brave as Sean and Rather. Perhaps it was because of this gap that she had never made up her mind to leave Sleeping Island. To put it bluntly, it's just cowardice. Nightingale's words echoed in her ears again. But this time it was not simple sarcasm, but a different meaning. Darkness enveloped her. After a few breaths, her eyes finally adapted to the thick darkness. The torches of the two people in front of her were reflected in her eyes again, but the light seemed to have shrunk a lot, leaving only a dim orange-red circle. Is this the bottom of the ruins? Rather looked around and at the same time, a faint echo came from above her head. It's not that big. It's no more than 200 steps. Can you see the boundary? Sean asked. It's nothing for us. As long as we stay underground for hundreds of years, we'll either adapt to the environment or become completely blind. At this time, Azima finally understood what Sean meant by a big hole. After entering through the passage, as the space suddenly expanded, the light lost the reflection of the stone wall and became much dimmer. Moreover, there was a certain angle between the passage and the cave, so the people walking in front of her seemed to have suddenly disappeared. How far is the source from us? Rather looked back at her. Azima hurriedly took out the coin from her pocket, and a green light instantly filled her vision. From the dome to her feet, countless emerald light spots flowed cheerfully, outlining the entire ruins. It seemed to be a fictional world. The dark underground, which was originally boundless, became clear and bright. With the outline of the light spots, she could even see the shape of each floor tile. The surrounding walls were engraved with grotesque fluorescent murals. It was a scene that she could not describe in words. The content of the murals was crazy and chaotic, definitely not the work of human beings. Below the murals were rows of iron cages, in which bones were piled up like mountains. She wondered how many lives had been imprisoned here, and then died in despair. About 100 steps away from them, the ground caved in and formed a huge pit. A dazzling beam of light rose from the pit and intertwined with the coin in her hand, but it was many times brighter. It was the first time she had seen such a spectacle. Azima? Seeing that she did not answer, Sean also turned around. Are you okay? Azima could not help but feel a little dry in her throat. She licked her lips and replied with difficulty, We have arrived. Ah, you mean you found the source? Rather spread out her hands. Where is it? We are now in the source. Chapter 1058. Your Majesty, there's an urgent report from the Kingdom of Dawn. The guard walked into the office and placed a thick sheepskin bag beside Roland's mahogany desk. According to the messenger, Sean asked them to send it here. Oh. Roland could not help feeling excited. He put down the biplane blueprint in his hand, stood up and said, Take it apart and have a look. It had been almost 2 months since the exploration team left Neverwinter. The last time he received news from them was when they crossed the border of Grey Castle. Roland was quite worried when he learned that the source was not in Neverwinter. After all, mining and transporting ores was a long-term process, and the First Army's mobility was limited. The farther away from his sphere of influence, the more difficult it would be to control the plan. Now that he finally got a reply, he naturally cared about it. But what made him feel strange was that the parcel was so big that it almost reminded him of the express mail in the modern world. Whether it was found or not, a piece of paper could explain the situation. What kind of situation did the exploration team encounter to make Sean send such a big parcel back? It's full of paper. Nightingale probably saw his confusion and whispered in his ear. Paper. Roland tilted his head and asked in a low voice, Has your ability evolved to see through objects? I wish so, but unfortunately I haven't. Nightingale said lazily. I just put my hand into the bag when they came in. So that's why. Her alertness is really... Wait. Roland suddenly felt that something was wrong. When Evelyn came in with new chaos drinks, or when the chef came in with a snack cart, would she also touch them like this? By the way, the amount of afternoon tea seemed to be a little less recently. Your Majesty, it's full of paper. The guard's words interrupted his thoughts. And most of it is covered with ink. What kind of new report is this? Roland looked inside and asked. Is there no letter that can be read? Please wait a moment. The guard poured out all the things in the sheepskin bag and finally found something new. There's a letter sealed with wax at the bottom. Give it to me. Then these blackened papers. Spread them out on the floor, he ordered. Sean can't go to the trouble of bringing back a bunch of useless things. Yes. Roland returned to his chair and opened the envelope. Judging from the date, it should have been sent a week and a half ago. Just like the bag, the letter was unusually long, at least 10 pages long. It was hard to imagine that a prospecting result would require such a lengthy description. Perhaps this was also the reason why the other party used the emergency method, but did not use animal messengers after entering the northern region of Grey Castle. Your Majesty, Miss Ozima has found the source you're looking for. It's at the northeastern junction of the Kingdom of Dawn and the Kingdom of Wolfheart. The locals call it the Cage Mountain. Sean's first words put Roland at ease. Fortunately, this trip was not in vain. The mine was still in the Kingdom of Dawn, which meant that he could control the entire mining process through the Quinn family. Although it would cost him a lot more, it was better than being restricted by the Kingdom of Wolfheart and the Kingdom of Everwinter. Moreover, Sean's wording was not complicated, which made Roland even more curious about the contents of the letter. But the source is not in the mine, but in a very ancient ruin. What's more incredible is that it doesn't belong to the underground civilization, nor does it have anything to do with the tequila fugitives. We once suspected that it might be the work of the undersea demons, but Miss Witch's discovery has denied this speculation. Your Majesty, this is definitely a ruin left by a race that we don't know about. Roland's brows immediately furrowed. An unknown new alien race had appeared in the Four Great Kingdoms? This was information that even the Witch Union had not mentioned. Although this territory was barren and backward in the past, it did not mean that they would ignore their own territory. If there were foreign activities, it was unlikely that they could escape the Witch's detection. In other words, if Sean's conclusion was correct, they probably existed even earlier than the underground civilization. The key question was, why would this race be so interested in uranium ore? He continued to read. The builders left a large number of murals on the stone walls at the bottom of the ruin. The various monsters shown in the murals do not match the images of the foreign races that we know. Based on our speculations, Miss Rother and I believe that this building is very likely to be a place of execution. Not only is it located on the source of the mine, but the builders also baked the ore into bricks, which were used to pave the walls and floor. Ozima found the same element in every corner of the ruin. Even the murals used a large number of mineral materials. Around the bottom, we found a large number of cages and bones, which are also reflected in the murals. They seem to have imprisoned a large number of enemies here, including not only the foreign races, but also their own kind that looked like the executioners. They then used the power of the source to torture their enemies, as if doing so could please their god. I have copied as many of the murals as I can and sent a messenger from the Tokat family to Neverwinter. However, due to the limited number of protective suits and the large size of the murals, the progress is relatively slow. The murals you see are only a part of it. It is estimated that it will take another 1 to 2 months to complete. In addition, I am very worried about Miss Rother. She went underground without a protective suit. I do not know if she will encounter the danger you mentioned. The local people had discovered the ruin earlier, but in the process of plundering, they contracted a strange disease. Many people died, so it is also known as the Temple of the Cursed. Moreover, judging from the purpose of the ruin's execution, this kind of danger should exist. Oh no, Roland could not help but whisper when he read this. What's wrong? Nightingale asked in the mist. Even if the gods' punishment witches are cursed, they can solve all the problems by changing their bodies. There is no need to worry about them, right? I am not worried about the gods' punishment witches but Sean and Ozima. He shook his head with a grave expression. According to the plan, they should not have stayed in the mining area for so long. Whether it was uranium ore or highly enriched uranium, the decay radiation was mainly alpha particles, which were difficult to penetrate the skin and cause harm to the human body. However, this did not mean that it was the same in the mining area. Considering that these radioactive elements had existed for hundreds of millions of years, some of them had decayed into more dangerous elements, such as radon, the situation became different. The half-life of radon was only 3.8 days. Radon itself was a gas, so it was very easy to be inhaled into the body and cause internal irradiation. Therefore, it had to be shielded. The protective suits he prepared for the exploration team were designed for going deep into the mining area. The full protective suit could effectively isolate a variety of highly toxic elements from the decay of uranium ore, and the activated carbon mask could absorb radon and other toxic gases. As long as they did not stay in the mining area for a long time, they could basically guarantee their safety. However, it would be different after a long time. The absorption of carbon particles was limited, which meant that those who participated in the copying of the murals might inhale radon gas that exceeded the safety standard and receive excessive ionizing radiation. Chapter 1059. In addition to recalling Ozima and Rother, Roland also wrote down follow-up arrangements. Safe uranium mining was a time-consuming and laborious task. Not only did it require detailed working procedures and setting up monitoring nodes, but it also required the workers to have a certain understanding of their own work and meticulously follow the rules. In the face of the imminent threat of war, Roland naturally did not intend to follow the usual routine. The North Slope mine was a good example. He directly purchased death row prisoners from Duke Quinn and stuffed them all into the ruins. There would be no pay, no holidays, and no protective measures for them. As long as they promised to work for 10 years, they would be released. Roland believed that those people would make the right choice between the gallows and a slim chance of survival. The lords would also be happy to exchange the lives of these scumbags for extra income. In this way, the 100 soldiers of the exploration team only needed to be responsible for supervision and vigilance, and the requirements for protection were greatly reduced. Sean was undoubtedly the most suitable candidate for management. Finally, at the end of the secret letter, Roland specifically asked his guards to find out the whereabouts of the treasure that people brought out of the ruins 100 years ago. After all, there were a few doubtful points in the rumor that concerned him. This race, which had never been recorded in history, seemed to have an inexplicable worship for radioactive elements. They used ore to make bricks to build sacrificial temples, used it to torture their enemies, and even swallowed the ore. The remains that were filled with green fluorescence in Ozima's eyes were proof of this. Although it was not clear whether their extinction was directly related to this worship, it should be very appropriate to call them the radiation race. Of course, the world was so big that it was not unusual for any kind of civilization to appear. What was really strange was that whether they went deep into the mines or used ore to make bricks, it was impossible to cause flesh and blood ulceration. Even if they lived in the mines and were exposed to all kinds of decay radiation for a long time, the only result was a sharp increase in the incidence of cancer. They could have lived for 80 years, but in the end they only lived to 66. After all, the efficiency of releasing nuclides by natural decay was too low. According to the rumor, the unlucky people who died tragically did not seem to have died of cancer or mutation complications. Instead, they seem to have been affected by strong radiation. In order to meet the latter condition, only high-purity nuclear matter could be achieved, and a large number of neutrons and hard gamma rays could be produced in an instant. However, this situation did not seem to be a level that the radiation race could achieve. Roland did not rule out the possibility that the rumor itself had distorted the truth, but there should have been more than one person who knew about the tragic situation of the villagers at that time. If it was true, the problem was likely to lie in those treasures. Only in this way could the ruins take on the role of the execution altar. Otherwise, every prisoner could live for more than 10 years before they died. If the altar was not built into a high-rise apartment building, it would not be able to accommodate so many people. It was a pity that 100 years had far exceeded the retrospective period of a xia. It was almost impossible to completely know what happened at that time, so he could only let Xiao In try his best. He vaguely felt that the truth behind the rumors might not be that simple. After Honey took the letter away, Roland walked to his desk and carefully looked at the mural rubbing that was spread out on the table. Although the distorted ink images were full of weird and absurd things, he could still roughly recognize the subject and the object. Most of the subjects were located in the center of the paintings, with large and delicate outlines, representing the owners of the ruins. The objects were much smaller, filling in every corner, and Roland could feel the pain and fear from their ferocious expressions. This was probably the common characteristic of all intelligent beings. They always regarded themselves as the protagonists in the historical records. As Shaowen said, both the subject and the object had nothing to do with the known alien races such as demons, demonic beasts, and the undersea civilization. Their shapes were really a bit weird. Some were like matchsticks, with limbs and tails indistinguishable. Some were like wriggling protozoa, with all the organs hidden in the brain. The contents of the murals were not all related to the execution. Several of the rubbing depicted the scene of the subject and the object fighting. They seemed to be able to fly with the wind by expanding their bodies and take advantage of high-altitude maneuverability to land behind the enemy on a large scale to achieve a two-pronged attack. The towering defense line did not play any role. The city was turned into a sea of fire, and the object was defeated. As long as one could distinguish the respective positions of the characters, one could roughly understand the events described in these seemingly crazy records. Roland's eyes suddenly stopped on a picture. What's wrong? Nightingale noticed his strangeness. Do you feel that the scene in this rubbing seems to have been seen somewhere before? He walked to the painting and squatted down. It was the last part of the description of the war. Countless matchsticks combined as one, as if they wanted to fight to the death, but were still beaten to the ground by the subject. Blood surged and converged into a huge lake. The surviving enemies fled to the seaside, but were all killed by the subject. Their bodies even piled up into a small hill in the sea. Well, Nightingale looked at it for a long time and said, except for the more ink used, it seems to be no different from other drawings. All right, combat ability and art appreciation ability were indeed natural opposites. Roland put his hand on his forehead and said, help me get a map of the southernmost region first. Got it. The latter did as he was told and handed him a thick stack of maps. At the same time, he also handed him a dried fish. Roland bit the dried fish and kept moving his hands. Soon, he found a bird's-eye view of a part of the endless cape. In order to determine the location of the festive harbor, he had asked Lightning and Maggie to draw a detailed map of this place, so he still had an impression of it. When he put the two maps together, he suddenly felt a layer of goosebumps on his back. His body felt like it was electrified, and even his fingertips were numb. The outlines of the two maps overlapped. Although there were some differences in the details, the direction of the boundary between the mainland and the swirling sea was basically the same. The similarity was more than 80%. Could it be a coincidence? The place on this map is the southernmost region? Nightingale also noticed something was wrong. Isn't that the settlement of the Sand Nation? Roland did not answer, but quickly glanced at the rest of the pictures. When he saw the second-to-last picture, all the blood in his body seemed to have frozen. More than 10 main bodies were gathered on a high platform, forming a large circle around each other. An irregular polyhedron floated in the middle of the circle, with countless strange tentacles dancing on its surface, like the hair of a snake demon. Sean had not seen this scene with his own eyes, so he naturally did not know what was shown in the picture. But Roland knew. Chapter 1060. In the dim dungeon, the light from the fire cast a shadow on the wall, which looked like a branch of a tree. There was no struggle, no cry of pain or begging for mercy. Only when the whips intertwined with the shadow would the shadow shake and let out a low hum. But this hum would soon be covered by the next lash of the whip. Crack. Crack. The shadow and the flickering light overlapped, and the dull sound of the whip seemed to be the only sound in the silent dungeon. After more than 10 lashes, Earl Lorenzo finally said, "Enough, stop." Yes. The executioner hurriedly stepped back. The back of the woman hanging on the scaffold was scarlet, and the crisscrossed whip marks were old and new. Obviously, this was not the first time she had been tortured. From the fine beads of sweat that appeared on her nose and arms, this type of pain wasn't completely useless. It was just that the other party used her willpower to suppress all of the cries into the depths of her heart. What? You still don't want to tell me where the holy book is? He walked up to the woman, clasped her chin, and forced her face up. She had a beautiful face, which was rare in the Judgment Army. Even though she had been imprisoned and tortured, it did not make her look any less beautiful. In other words, under the flickering light of the fire, Her sweaty skin and flickering eyes added a touch of strangeness to it. The church is finished. Farina, how long do you want to go against me? Even if you don't think about yourself, you should think about your companions who were captured. These damn stray dogs, Lorenzo thought bitterly. The kingdom of Wolfheart is so big, but why do they have to go against Archduke Island? Wasn't it clear enough that I executed those messengers? With a team of Scourge, as long as they did not provoke Grey Castle, they could live a free and unfettered life anywhere they wanted. How dare they try to murder me? If he hadn't been careful and asked for a few more people from His Highness Maine, his head would have been hung on the city wall by now. Thinking of this, his missing left ear began to hurt again. That day when the God's Punishment army of the two sides was fighting, the sword that almost cut off his neck was cut by Farina. Fortunately, she was almost exhausted at that time, and her sword was interrupted by her subordinates. In the end, she only managed to cut off half of his ear. It would have been fine if they had only suffered minor injuries, but what made Lorenzo even angrier was that out of the 20 or so Scourge that he had managed to save, only 2 or 3 of them were still able to move. The rest had either been killed in battle, or were missing limbs. It was almost impossible for them to fight again. This was his capital to occupy Archduke Island. The nobles in the kingdom of Wolfheart did not seek revenge on him, not because he had changed his identity from a bishop to a noble, but because of his limited strength. They did not dare to act rashly in front of Scourge. If this news were to be leaked, it would be difficult for him to sit on his seat as an earl. Lorenzo wanted nothing more than to hack him into 1,000 pieces to vent his anger. But he couldn't do that before knowing the whereabouts of the Holy Scripture. I don't know whether the church is finished or not, but I'm sure you're finished. Earl Lorenzo, no, I should call you a traitor. After a long while, Farina said in a low voice, "It's my fault that you didn't have enough Scourge. But you don't have many left, do you? Otherwise, you wouldn't be so eager to ask where the Holy Scripture is. You want to know the secret of the Pope's inheritance, the method to create the God's Punishment army to protect your poor position." Slap. A crisp slap interrupted her sarcasm. "Since you know what I want, you'd better tell me honestly," Lorenzo said, gnashing his teeth. "I'll ask you again, where is the Holy Scripture?" A trace of blood trickled from the corner of Farina's mouth. "I don't know. That's a pity." The earl looked at the executioner. "Cut off a leg for me. I don't care who it is. I want this bitch's companion to stop acting." Although Farina was very weak, her tone was full of sarcasm. "Do you remember the finger you sent me last time? My blood was frozen and changed color. Do you still want to threaten me with it? It seems that the life of the bishop is so comfortable that you've forgotten the difference between a living person and a dead person. It was cut off from a corpse, right? You've killed them long ago, traitor." Lorenzo's face darkened. "And I'm not even the acting pope. How could I know the Holy Scripture? Maybe His Excellency Tucker Thor knows, but he never mentioned it to me. So no one in this world knows how to train the God's Punishment army anymore." "You're lying," Lorenzo said with a livid face. "Didn't Tucker Thor ask you to come to the kingdom of Wolfheart to rebuild the church and avenge Hermes? Without the Holy Scripture, how could the church fight against Grey Castle?" "Huh." Farina laughed out loud. "Even with the God's Punishment army, we can't fight against Grey Castle. His Excellency the acting pope just wanted to save everyone's lives and let the rest of the people live in peace." "Ridiculous. Do you think I'll believe you?" the earl growled. "If you want to live in peace, why did you attack Archduke Island? It's all for the money, food, armor, and weapons here. Tucker gave you Scourge, but you said he just wanted you to live well? That's ridiculous. You can't do anything if you don't believe me." "It's the truth," Farina said indifferently. "I also want to tell you one thing. If you didn't kill those messengers at the beginning, but refused them nicely, we would still have to go to Archduke Island. But you just had to make the worst choice. You should know that what I hate the most are two-faced traitors. You betrayed His Holiness O'Brien's trust, and you don't deserve the rest of your life that His Holiness Tucker Thor sacrificed himself for," she said firmly. "It's a pity that I couldn't kill you with my own hands, but sooner or later, the nobles in the kingdom of Wolfheart will find out that you're bluffing." Even if you take off the coat of the holy city, you'll never become one of them. You're just a traitor, and your doomsday is not far away. Lorenzo took a deep breath and tried to calm his anger. You're provoking me because you want me to kill you to prevent the news of the Holy Scripture from leaking, right? Don't worry, I won't be fooled so easily. You know, not only are the resources accumulated during the raid in the Kingdom of Wolfheart stored here, but also a lot of instruments of torture, used to interrogate witches. I wonder how much better you are compared to those fallen witches. He glanced at Farina's bare feet in the air. I think I'll start with your toenails. When I pull them off piece by piece, I hope you can still insist on your previous answer. After returning to the castle hall, the Earl could no longer hold back his anger. He swept the tea set on the table to the ground. Damn it, damn it, damn it, damn Farina. Although Lorenzo appeared to be very confident, he did not know how long Farina, who came from the Judgment Army, could last. These tin cans were usually impervious to everything, so it would not be easy to pry her mouth open. The Archduke Island could not suddenly close the sea routes and ban trade, which would only arouse the suspicion of other forces. If they maintain the status quo, those merchants would be the nobles' best informants. Lorenzo urgently needed a force that could fill the gap in the God's punishment army before everything went too far. However, the key clue was in the hands of a person who could not wait to get rid of him. How hateful. Just then, one of his stewards came in and said, Sir, I've heard an interesting piece of news recently. No, I'm not in the mood. Lorenzo interrupted rudely. The steward glanced at the broken utensils on the ground and said patiently, It may be helpful to your current trouble. What? Lorenzo looked up abruptly. Tell me about it. Since he became the Earl and took the Archduke Island as his territory, his followers had also become members of the family. This steward named Hagrid was one of his trusted followers, and had once served as the executive priest. He did have some ideas. The border of the Kingdom of Dawn seems to be restless recently. It seems that they're planning to march into the depths of the Cage Mountain again. What does that have to do with us? Lorenzo frowned. No matter which lord occupies the Cage Mountain, the Archduke Island will not benefit from it. Chapter 1061. The King of Grey Castle. Lorenzo shuddered involuntarily. The man who had risen from an unknown lord of the border to the ruler of Grey Castle in just a few years was well known in the church. No intelligence could explain how he had risen so quickly. Even the holy city of Hermes, which was about to unify the continent, had been defeated by him. Lorenzo could make such a quick decision to sever all ties with the church mainly because of Roland Wimbledon. In his eyes, the church and Grey Castle had become mortal enemies. If he still called himself a bishop, he could be destroyed at any time. If he did not take off his bishop's robe now, when would he? However, Roland had just ascended to the throne, so his attention should be on his own territory. Now that he had suddenly intervened in the border between the Kingdom of Dawn and the Kingdom of Wolfheart, and made it known to everyone, his purpose was very suspicious. Are you sure? The Earl looked at Hagrid. Tell me the details. There's no problem with the credibility of this news. It has been verified by many parties, Hagrid said confidently. First of all, the troops stationed at the foot of Cage Mountain are from Grey Castle. Their clothes and outfits are exactly the same, which is undoubtedly the style of that strange army. Second, all the condemned prisoners in the Kingdom of Dawn have been summoned. Not only are they gathering in Cage Mountain, but they are also serving the King of Grey Castle. Cage Mountain. Condemned prisoners. Lorenzo paced back and forth. Suddenly his eyes flashed. Is he here for that thing? Very likely, my lord, Hagrid replied with a nod. No. I should say it must be so. But how does he know about this? It's not surprising that he knows. The person who discovered the ruins only relied on luck. I've always believed that those ruins don't exist in isolation. They may have some kind of connection. And Roland happened to be ahead of everyone else. Although the church had not been able to find out exactly how Prince Greycastle rose to power, there were several theories circulating among the church. Putting aside the nonsense such as the incarnation of God and the spokesperson of the devil, there was one explanation that had a lot of believers. He had obtained the inheritance of a certain relic, and since then he had mastered incredible power. Even though the 3 archbishops did not care about this, there were many believers who believed that this was the truth. Lorenzo was one of them. Otherwise, what right did the other party have to be above the holy city? When it came to Cage Mountain, the most unbelievable relic was none other than the cursed temple. In the past, the god's punishment army had swept through the entire kingdom of Wolfshart with the momentum of thunder. The nobles of the kingdom of Wolfshart either died in battle or surrendered. Even the Queen of Clearwater and the King of Wolfshart had not been able to stop the attack of the church. As the former bishop of Archduke Island, he participated in most of the logistics and mopping up work, sending the looted goods to the front lines or storing them. During a plundering operation in Precipice Ridge, he happened to learn about this legend from 100 years ago. It was said that a group of villagers had stolen a batch of treasures from the cursed temple in Cage Mountain. Then they died one after another, and the treasures fell into the hands of the local nobles. The ancestor of the Earl of Precipice Ridge was very interested in this. He believed that it was not the curse that had caused all this, but the treasures that had been stolen. Therefore, after spending a lot of effort, he bought some of the treasures from the Kingdom of Dawn. After some research, and at the cost of more than 10 lives, the old Earl had indeed found a different artifact. It looked ordinary, but it could produce a fatal light. The effect was very similar to a curse, and it could be called a weapon that could kill people without leaving a trace. However, after a few attempts, it no longer responded, as if it had used up all its energy and became a dead object. Although the old Earl had sent people to the border many times to search, and even took the risk of entering the temple himself, he had never found a way to restore it. Therefore, he wrote this story in his family history, hoping that his descendants could find the answer. The strange artifact was also kept as a family heirloom until more than 100 years later, when the church conquered Precipice Ridge, and it changed owners again. At that time, although this artifact had aroused Lorenzo's interest, it was also true that the family history mentioned that it no longer responded. After fiddling with it for a long time without any results, he packed up the treasures and threw them into the warehouse, planning to wait for the holy city to collect them. After all, not everything recorded in the family history was true. There were many noble families that boasted about their long bloodlines and amazing wealth. If they believed all of them, the church would not have been able to wipe out the kingdom of Wolfheart and the kingdom of Everwinter so easily. However, after the fiasco in Coldwind Ridge, the good situation of the church took a turn for the worse. No one cared about the seized treasures, and Lorenzo had forgotten about it. Now that the steward mentioned it, Lorenzo suddenly remembered it. If the king of Greycastle also came for the treasures in the cursed temple, then it was much more credible. The earl could not help but feel a little excited. "Go on." "Yes, sir," Hagrid nodded. Assuming that Roland Wimbledon got the information about the treasure from other ruins, then it's very likely that he knows how the treasure works, or even how to restore it. If we can find out this information, we can replace Scourge. That was right, a weapon that could release curses. Its deterrence would definitely deter the nobles in the kingdom of Wolfheart, and Archduke Island would have more time to find the holy book. Lorenzo stomped his feet. "Follow me to the warehouse now." "Sir, I have to make sure that the treasure is still on Archduke Island. Since it's so important, we can't let ordinary guards guard it." To prevent the news from leaking, Lorenzo and his steward searched the warehouse for half a day. After eating a bellyful of dust, he finally found the bag of treasures in an inconspicuous corner. The earl was glad that he did not ask for help from a third person. He opened the burlap bag and immediately noticed the strangeness of the treasure. Compared to the luminous pearls and exquisite statues that were also looted from the ruins, the treasure was as plain as a stone. It had a square outline, was no more than a palm wide, and had a very rough surface. Even granite, which had been polished twice, was smoother and more beautiful than it. If it were not for the sapphire pattern inlaid on it, no one would have been willing to bring it back. The Earl of Cliff Ridge had indeed mentioned in his letter that it cost the least of all the treasures to buy. But now, a square pattern on the stone was slowly flashing, and a soft blue light flowed from one end to the other, as if it was pointing the way. The two of them looked at each other, and revealed expressions of ecstasy at the same time. The stone, which had not reacted for nearly 100 years, had actually changed, and Roland's men had appeared in the Temple of the Cursed. It was unbelievable that these two events had nothing to do with each other. If what they had just said was just speculation, after seeing this scene, the possibility had become very high. Roland had indeed found a way to restore it. "You have to go to the Cage Mountain," Lorenzo said as he carefully held the stone in his arms. "I don't trust anyone but you. You can have as much money as you want, as long as you can find out how to use the treasure." "I understand, sir," Hagrid replied with a hand on his chest. Chapter 1062. In a tavern on the dock of Archduke Island. Joe fidgeted with the glass in his hand and looked at the entrance from time to time. He had never felt that time was so hard to bear. Regret, fear, pain, and confusion emerged in his heart, but he could do nothing but continue to wait. It was only when a hooded man walked into the tavern and sat down beside Joe that he heaved a sigh of relief, but what followed was even greater anxiety and uneasiness. "How is she now?" Joe stared at the man's lips, afraid to see the worst answer. "Still alive." The man's answer made him feel at ease. "But Lady Farina is not doing well." The man took off his hood and said worriedly, "The bishop seems to want something from her. He tortures her every day. Sometimes I can hear her scream in the hall. Sooner or later, she won't be able to stand it." This was all expected, Joe repeatedly told himself. Since they failed to attack the castle, all the people who were still alive would inevitably suffer cruel revenge, and Farina, as the leader, would not be an exception. Moreover, the traitor hoped to get the whereabouts of the holy book from her, so he would naturally use all means to force her to talk. As long as she is alive. Although he said this in his heart, his fingers deeply clenched into his palm. He even dared not think about what would happen if he could not save Farina. Perhaps, even death would be an extravagant hope. Damn it. Joe thought regretfully. Why did I promise her? Why did I have to attract the enemy's attention so that the God's punishment army could break through from the side? Why did I have to retreat when the battle is unfavorable? I would rather die with everyone in the castle, so that at least I could be with His Holiness until the last moment of my life. Your Excellency. The man hesitated for a moment. Do you know what the bishop wants? If you do, you might as well give it to him. At least Lady Farina won't. He is not the bishop, he is a traitor. Joe clenched his teeth. What he covets is not in my hands. It has already fallen along with the Cathedral of Hermes. At the mention of Hermes, the man's face showed obvious sadness. May the gods bless us, he murmured. How ironic, Charles thought. When the old and new holy cities were still in existence, he was already one of the best among the younger generation of the Judgment Army. The people who came and went were all outstanding people in the army. They did not care about ordinary believers. Now that things had come to this, the bishop had betrayed him, and the priest had betrayed him. The only person he could rely on was an ordinary follower. Furthermore, his feelings for the church were even deeper than many of the higher-ups. If not, he would not have taken the initiative to look for him when he was on the verge of collapse. He was dissatisfied with Lorenzo's decision to abandon his identity as a bishop and call himself the Count of the Archduke Island. However, he did not dare to oppose Lorenzo because of his lowly status. On the night of the battle, he happened to catch a glimpse of the attacker's face. After that, he wandered around the castle and paid more attention to him. That was how they met. Joe did not even have to worry that it was a trap set up by Lorenzo. He had nothing left, and it was not worth his time to deal with it. If this man had been sent by a traitor, after several contacts, he would have already seen that he had no value and chosen to get rid of him. Unfortunately, this man was an ordinary believer in the past, and now he was just a low-level servant. He could do nothing but provide limited information to Joe. I have to go back. After a long silence, the man put on his hood. If I leave the castle for too long, the steward will be suspicious. The next opportunity to come out is in 3 days. Shall we still meet here? Ah, Joe recovered from his trance. Let's meet here. If there's any change, I'll have someone send a message to you. I see. He paused for a moment. Sir, please cheer up. If anyone can save Lady Farina, it's you. Me? No. I can't do anything. His mind was filled with darkness. There was no turning point or hope. No matter how he prayed to the gods, there was no response. Joe nodded his head numbly. By the way, the man took 2 steps forward and turned around again. Something happened in the castle recently. One of the bishop's trusted followers, Priest Hagrid, led a group of people to the southwest. I heard from the coachman that they want to cross the border of Cage Mountain. I think this information might be helpful to you. Perhaps it was too obvious that his words were meant to comfort Joe, and his voice became softer as he spoke. Indeed, it was normal for the Lord to send people to other territories. Even if Cage Mountain's location was a little special, it had nothing to do with Archduke Island. As long as Lorenzo did not take Scourge with him, breaking into the dungeon to rescue Farina was no different from a fool's dream. Yes, thank you. Don't mention it, sir. He put his hand on his chest and bowed slightly. That's all I can do for you. Cage Mountain. Joe had heard this term a lot recently. He poured the ale in his cup into his mouth, and let the bitterness fill his mouth. But the next moment he suddenly froze on the spot. Wait, Cage Mountain? Like a bolt of lightning cutting through the darkness, an idea suddenly emerged in Joe's mind. A possible turning point. Returning to his temporary house outside the city, Joe's eyes fell on a black book on the table. It was the will left by the last acting pope, Tucker Thor, before he jumped off the city wall. It was not the holy book that recorded the inheritance of the church, the method of creating the God's punishment army, but the entrustment of a dying predecessor. In the book he told the story of human beings and demons, and the origin of the battle of divine will. This shocking secret stunned everyone, and they suddenly understood why Tucker wanted them to evacuate Hermes. Everything was over. She put down the burden, and lived the rest of her life in peace. Perhaps it was because of this self-sacrifice that Farina did not want to see the church disappear. Joe knew clearly that apart from her feelings for Hermes, she still had a lingering long-cherished wish to see Roland Wimbledon and his kingdom of Grey Castle fall into hell before the church. But now, a turning point had appeared in the hands of the king who had destroyed the church. Joe did not expect Grey Castle to help. It was almost impossible for those people to save the remnants of the church. Only by directing the spearhead to the traitors of Archduke Island could he have a chance. The news of Grey Castle's sudden appearance in the Cage Mountain area did not attract his attention. There was too much noise in the tavern, and the church would no longer have anything to do with Grey Castle. Until the believer's words suddenly enlightened him. Lorenzo used to be responsible for collecting looted goods from all over the kingdom of Wolfheart, and the legendary treasure in the Cage Mountain was not a secret. At that time, it was reported as a special seizure. As for whether it had been transported to Hermes, Joe did not know, but it did not matter at all. What mattered was whether the king of Grey Castle was also looking for the same thing. The nobles in the kingdom of Wolfheart would be afraid, but Roland would not. No one could resist the attack of that terrible army. As long as he could get rid of the traitors through their hands, he would have a chance to save Farina in the melee. Even if he could not save Farina, it was better to be captured than to be tortured endlessly. Joe took a deep breath. If the outcome really reached that step, he would no longer hide in the dark. At least he could be with her until the last moment of her life. Because he had always loved her. Since the day he joined the Judgment Army and met Farina. Chapter 1063. 2 weeks after receiving Sean's urgent report, the sun once again appeared in the western region of Grey Castle. The months of the demons ended without any warning. This was probably the most peaceful months of demons in hundreds of years. There were no demonic beasts or gunshots. The snowfield outside the city wall was empty and flat. The thick snow reflected the dazzling golden light under the sun, like a flawless mirror. Therefore, this year's Victory Day was particularly lively. Many residents walked into the field before the snow melted, dug out a ball from the knee-deep snow, and brought it home to boil and drink, both for celebration and as a memorial. Only a few people knew the undercurrent surging under the calm. Third Border City Book Grotto. Roland received the expected reply. There are no records of this, not even the documents left by the underground civilization. Celine leaned tiredly against the corner, surrounded by opened ancient books. The first record of the southernmost region was about 860 years ago. It was a travel book, probably written by a witch who moved quickly. There were only a few words about it, but it can be confirmed that the Endless Cape was already a desert at that time. It was the first time he saw Sarcoma look so tired. The three senior witches rarely sat down. They usually hung on the dome by relying on their main tentacles, and their thin tentacles were always dancing. But now, all the tentacles were hanging down, covering the surface like fur. At first glance, it looked like a radish that had just been pulled out of the soil. Maybe you should rest for a while. I want to, but my body can't stop at all. Celine smiled bitterly. Your discovery is too amazing. It can be said to have subverted the Union. No, the entire recorded history of mankind. This was also the reason why Roland had long expected the answer. If there was a relevant discovery in the Union era, it would be impossible not to leave a word or two. After all, it involved the battle of divine will. Even if it needed to be kept secret, at least the entire senior management should know about it. The race in the murals might be older than he thought. 860 years was only a clear record of evidence, but it did not mean that the southernmost region was full of vitality before that. In this way, the myth of the three gods' emissary and the Millennium War circulated among the Majin people was more credible. At that time, the first battle of divine will had not yet begun. Your Majesty, I'm not afraid that you'll laugh at me, she sighed. We've obviously taken a big step forward in our understanding, but why do I feel so confused? It was as if he had lost something. This is all normal, Roland comforted her. As the saying goes, the more you know, the more you realize that you know nothing. In the end, all the doubts can be summed up in 3 questions. Oh, which 3? Pasha asked curiously. Where am I? Who am I hitting? Who is hitting me? The sea of consciousness was silent. Ahem, all right, I just want you to relax. Roland coughed twice. The real answer should be who I am, where I come from, and where I'm going. Where do I come from? Where do I go? Pasha murmured. Indeed, these 3 questions seem very simple, but if you think about it carefully, they are not so easy to answer. If you change your position slightly, you will get a completely different answer. Oh, have you become muddled from reading too many books? Aukia could not help but interrupt. What's so hard to answer? I'm Aukia from Tequila, and I'm going back to Tequila in the future. Isn't that enough? I think you're just fooled by him. This is why I sometimes envy you. Celine put her main tentacle on her head weakly. Sometimes being simple-minded is also a kind of happiness. Pasha laughed and shook her head. Thank you very much. This does make us feel a lot more relaxed. But your reaction really surprised me. Not only are you calm, but you also consider our thoughts, as if you're not surprised at all. Because this world is full of uncertainty to me. Roland smiled non-committally and changed the topic. Since we've confirmed the unknown battle of divine will and the existence of a new race, let's have a meeting. Such important news, the sooner everyone knows, the better. As you wish, Your Majesty. Pasha bowed her main tentacle and replied. The internal meeting was soon held in the castle's reception hall. The level of confidentiality was classified as top secret. The participants were all representatives of the United Front, and even the minister of the administrative office was not invited. When Roland announced this unexpected discovery, everyone had a look of disbelief on their faces. He also gave them a 10-minute buffer, which was rare for him, so that they could whisper to each other at will. The battle of divine will was not unique to humans. It was very likely to be a special state of affairs, which was completely beyond everyone's imagination. If it wasn't for him, no one would have believed him. After the hall gradually quieted down, Tilly was the first to stand up. If this is really the battle of divine will, then where are the victors? Not demons, sea monsters, underground civilization, and definitely not humans. Where are they now? This was also the first question that popped up in most people's minds. Roland looked at Pasha behind the light curtain, and the latter nodded. I don't know if you still remember, in the records of the underground civilization, there are 2 sentences. Magic power makes us extraordinary, and mastering magic power is the ladder to pursuing the divine will. We might as well assume that all the participants in the Battle of Divine Will can use magic power. Then, will the victors raise the power of magic power to a new level and go to places we can't see? For example, the world in the sky. This was also the speculation that the 3 senior witches had racked their brains to come up with. Although Roland felt that there were many loopholes, it was better than a simple, I don't know. After all, not knowing meant nothingness. According to common sense, the more powerful a civilization was, the longer it would leave traces. The ancients used thatch and mud to build houses, which would be weathered into dust after 1,000 years. However, the concrete buildings of Neverwinter, even after 1,000 years, could still leave their outlines. A civilization that could win the Battle of Divine Will but disappeared after the war, and their existence could only be known from scattered ruins. This undoubtedly made people think in a bad direction. If the victory could not reverse the fate of extinction, it would probably affect everyone's determination to go to war. Based on Tequila's speculation, Roland could at least set a goal for himself. So the content recorded on the murals is at least 1,400 years ago? Edith pondered for a while. Then what the humans experience can't be called the first battle of divine will. That being said, it's easy to confuse people by changing the name, Roland replied. So I'll temporarily call it the Battle of the Lost. As for how many times we've fought it, it's not important. Your Majesty, Barov hesitated. The expedition plan that is scheduled to be carried out after the beginning of spring. Carry out according to the plan, he interrupted without hesitation. No matter how many unsolved mysteries there are in the Battle of Divine Will, we must move forward. Perhaps the war itself is a way for us to get closer to the answer. And if we lose to the demons, there will be no hope. Chapter 1064. After nearly a year of preparation, Neverwinter was now running at full speed like a war machine. Even the months of demons could not stop this new king's city from crazily absorbing the surrounding resources. The administrative office once thought that a population of 100,000 was an unachievable goal, but in just 1 year, the city's population had doubled. The injection of a large number of fresh labor led to the rapid expansion of various industries. There were 4 new chemical plants, and the number of machine-related processing and assembly plants was more than double digits. According to statistics, the monthly salary paid by the administrative office was close to 10,000 golden dragon. When Roland first came here, his largest income was only 24,000 golden dragon, after plundering Longsong's stronghold. In other words, the wealth that the Duke of the Western region had accumulated for half a lifetime was only enough to pay for 2.5 months' salary. Steam engines, paddle steamers, perfume, and chaos drinks constituted the main sources of income. These goods were sold to the fjords and the 4 kingdoms through the Joint Chamber of Commerce. Except for the remuneration that must be paid, the rest of the money was converted into a large number of raw materials and handicraft products. The money came and went, forming a delicate balance, and the savings in the national treasury had a tendency to shrink. It could be said that this was a very unbalanced development model, but in the face of the threat of the Battle of Divine Will, Roland did not have many choices. If he did not pour resources into heavy industry, the machine guns could not shoot freely, and the cannons would always be short of shells. Only in this way he had spare energy to arm the entire army. The expansion of the First Army from 8,000 to 10,000 soldiers was only the foundation. The Air Force under the command of Tilly Wimbledon was also actively preparing. In addition, the militia recruitment requirements and mobilization bill had entered the drafting stage. These 2 policies aimed to improve the war potential of Neverwinter and forced ordinary students, workers, and farmers to receive the most basic disciplinary training, similar to the university military training in later generations. Although they could not directly carry guns to the battlefield, they could shorten the training time when there was an urgent need to replenish manpower. Because the specific time of the bloody moon was obviously different, no one could be sure when the Battle of Divine Will would begin. If the situation was optimistic, there might be 4 to 5 years, and the worst case would be about 1 or 2 years. For Roland, the biggest strategic goal at present was to turn defense into offense when the bloody moon arrived, so that the flames of war would burn in the enemy's territory. So the devil entrenched in the ruins of Tequila was a nail he had to remove. In fact, the transportation of supplies and personnel had already begun in late winter and early spring. This was the advantage of rail transportation. Even if the entire fertile plains was covered in snow, as long as the tracks were cleared, the war supplies could be continuously transported to the front lines. Most of the steel produced in Neverwinter had been turned into rails, and the railway lines hidden in the misty forest had also been laid. It could be said that the new northern expedition would officially start at Roland's command. Be it the army or the city, they were all ready to go. But before that, he still had 2 things to do. On the second day after the months of demons ended, Roland received Thunder's request to meet him. What? You're leaving so soon? He set up a relaxing afternoon tea party in the living room. While bringing Anna along, he also sent an invitation to Marjorie. For this businesswoman who was quite compatible with lightning, he could only do so much. Can't wait to explore the shadow domain. I knew I couldn't hide it from you. Thunder smiled frankly. Every moment I maneuvered the steel ship, I imagined the scene of it sailing against the sea breeze and breaking the waves. If possible, I even wanted to sail directly to the Selene. In that case, we'll have to face the risk of water and food shortage halfway. Marjorie shook her head helplessly. Besides, the Chamber of Commerce that invested heavily in you won't be happy to see you leave their fleet behind, unless you plan to never return to the Fjords Islands again. Haha, I just wanted to express my excitement to His Majesty. He touched his chin and said, as Marjorie said, this expedition is no longer just about me. After all, for the fjords, the development of new waters means opportunities and wealth, and every Chamber of Commerce will be tempted. This is probably the largest expedition in the history of the Fjords Islands. I have to return as soon as possible to be fully prepared. It seemed that after Thunder's publicity and recruitment, this expedition had changed from a team to a group. Roland smiled and sipped his tea. He was indeed the most famous explorer in the fjords. He could attract a huge investment just by showing his intention. It seems that in just a few months, you've mastered the steel ship. It's all thanks to Her Highness Anna. Thunder put his hand on his chest to show his respect to Anna. She helped a lot with the subsequent improvement of the hull. If I didn't see it with my own eyes, it's hard to imagine that such a huge iron ship could be more flexible than a 3-masted ship. I also want to ask you for a favor. Anna nodded. During the trial voyage, this ship only moved in the shallow coastal waters. If it's possible, I hope to get a sailing report in the deep sea area. Any problems can be recorded in it. It's best to use Neverwinter's new waterproof ink and sealed plastic bags. That way, even if it falls into the sea, it can be completely preserved. Probably not expecting that Anna would make such a serious request, Thunder was stunned for a moment before he smiled and said, I see. Please leave it to me, Your Highness. Roland touched Anna's head dotingly, and then looked at Thunder. I also have a favor to ask of you. Just tell me. I want to recruit a group of explorers. It has nothing to do with this expedition. Thunder quickly realized. Yes. Roland put down his teacup. I want them to go to the Endless Cape to have a look. I remember there was nothing but yellow sand and black water there, Marjorie said in surprise. I used to think so too. Roland shrugged. The Endless Cape is hardly dangerous, so there's no need for experienced experts. It can be said that the number of people is more important than the ability. Seeing that Roland did not elaborate, Thunder did not ask further. There are many people like this in the fjords. I wonder what the selection rules are. No. Roland replied. Actually, anyone can be an explorer. As long as you find a novel relic in the Endless Cape, no matter what it is, you can get a reward. Even if it's a brick from the ruins? Of course, but it must come from the Endless Cape, Roland said affirmatively. The more information the relic contains, the more generous the reward. This information is valid for a long time. As long as I'm still the king of Grey Castle, it will definitely be honored. With your guarantee, I'm afraid that place will be crowded in the future. Marjorie covered her mouth and laughed. I'm wondering if I should take the opportunity to open a tavern in Festive Harbor. You're more than welcome. Boosting the economy of the oil port was indeed one of Roland's goals. After all, the civilization in the painting had a history of at least 1,400 years, and it was still unknown whether they could leave anything behind. Launching a reward to recruit people was undoubtedly a way to kill two birds with one stone. By the way, Your Majesty, Thunder said, since the steel ship has passed the sea test and is officially put into use, does it have a name? Of course, I plan to call it the Snow Wind. Snow Wind. The explorer pondered for a moment. It's indeed a nice name, but won't it be too soft and not match with its steel body? Chapter 1065. The ship whistled and slowly left Shallow Bay. Joan stood at the stern and reluctantly said goodbye to her expedition companions. After spending a winter together, her relationship with the witches had improved greatly. Perhaps it was because she had not experienced the feeling of being cared for and missed for a long time. So the hard-won friendship was particularly strong. The phrase "see you again," that she repeated over and over again, was what she had learned before she left. It was the phrase she had learned before she left. Lightning looked quite lonely. She stared blankly at the stern of the ship, which made Roland want to tell her several times that Thunder was on the ship. But when he thought of Roland's entrustment, he finally suppressed the thought. Maggie covered her mouth, her shoulders trembling and her eyes watery. She could not say goodbye for a long time, probably because she was afraid that she would cry if she opened her mouth. Lorgar was the calmest. She hugged Maggie with her tail, held Lightning with one hand, and waved to Joan with the other. Death was a common thing for Majins, and she had long been used to this kind of farewell. In Roland's eyes, she was no longer the solitary princess of the Wildflame clan when she first came to Neverwinter. At this moment, there was no doubt that she had changed, even though she had not noticed it herself. This was also one of the reasons why Roland did not tell her. With such a group of friends, he believed that sooner or later, Lightning would return to her former energetic self. The sisters who had been separated for the time being would eventually be reunited. The day after Thunder left, Roland announced through Grey Castle Weekly that the new King's City would hold the first national sports meet. There was only one event, and that was long-distance running. The race would start from the main city of Neverwinter or the Longsong area, and the finishing point would be at the center of Kingdom Avenue. The total distance was 28 kilometers. The top 10 would be awarded 110 Golden Dragon, and the champion would also be awarded a commemorative badge by the king. This news instantly caused a sensation in the entire western region. For a time, everyone on the streets and alleys was asking about the rules of the sports meet. The momentum was no less than the release of the Magic movie. With a down payment of 100 Golden Dragon Stones, one could buy a house with water, heat, and electricity in the residential area closest to the castle district. Apart from the local residents who had migrated the earliest, this was also the goal of most people in Neverwinter. Although the new King's City did not have the traditional separation of the inner and outer city, and there were no walls between the various districts, people still hoped to be closer to His Majesty the King. In the past, this goal would take more than half of a lifetime to achieve, but now it was possible to achieve it in one go. This was different from the Outstanding Contribution Award and the War Hero Award. The former were awarded to the masters of the industry. Even if they did not rely on the Golden Dragon Award, they would not be troubled by money. The latter required one to risk one's life. Courage and luck were indispensable. But what about the sports meet? He just needed to know how to run. Who doesn't have two legs? In the eyes of the crowd, this was another proof of His Majesty's concern for the people and his benevolence. What made many people even happier was that the previous generous policies were only available to official residents. This time, it was for all the people, just like the headline of the weekly newspaper. Not to mention the people of Neverwinter, Even businessmen from other cities could participate in the sports meet. It was not surprising that this novel activity could have such a great impact. Of course, what Roland wanted to do was not just to enjoy a race and see who ran faster. The sports meet itself could strengthen unity and encourage people to challenge themselves and work hard. As the aftermath of the Victory Day celebration and the horn before the start of the war, there was nothing more inspiring than a sports meet. In addition, he had a small plan. That was to publicize the comeback of the bicycle. As a failure of the early policy, he had always been somewhat resentful. The proud invention of the King of Grey Castle, the appearance of Barev's friendship advertisement, and the posters that were hung all over the square. In the end, only about 200 bicycles had been produced, and it had failed miserably due to lack of productivity. Not only had the factory been turned into a steam engine assembly plant, but half of the finished products had also been given to the workers as remuneration. Not only did he fail to realize the scene where everyone rode bicycles to and fro the various urban areas, but he had also lost a lot of resources because of his poor planning. For example, the special machinery for the production of bicycle parts had all been sent back to the furnace to be rebuilt. The remaining half of the bicycles were too small to be delivered to the First Army, and were all sealed in the warehouse. It could be said that among the many projects he had arranged, this was the only one that did not bring any benefits. Of course, he had to find a way to erase this black spot. Today's situation in the city was completely different from that of 2 or 3 years ago. The crazy expansion had brought about a sharp increase in the urban area. The newly built residential areas were lined up along Kingdom Avenue, farther and farther away from the factories, docks, mines, and other major work sites. Walking had become a time-consuming and laborious task. The improvement of the city streets also allowed more places for cyclists to reach easily. Secondly, Neverwinter's productivity had also been greatly improved. Coupled with the application of the rubber worms and the new machine tools, the witches could be eliminated from the beginning, and the existing projects would not be affected. Now was the best time to introduce the bicycle. As long as the Second Army rode the bicycle along with the long-distance running team, and acted as guides and rescuers, everyone would naturally find the advantages of this means of transportation. In this way, the biggest mistake he had made since he was in power would no longer exist. Roland thought confidently, "Oh, is this the great chief city?" Gwell's Burnfire walked out of the cabin and rubbed his cheeks. "This stone boat is strong, but it's too noisy. I'm afraid my ears will be deafened if I stay here for another 2 or 3 days. Father, are you really not going to cover up your tattoos and change into a set of northern clothes?" Rohan followed closely behind him and said, "Those people on the dock are all looking at us. It doesn't matter. It's enough for them to stare. But, are you worried about being discriminated against?" Gwells glanced at him. "If even the passers-by of Majin can't stand it, what kind of life is my daughter living?" The great chief said that in his territory, everyone should be treated equally. "I'd like to see if he's lying to the 3 gods." At the mention of Lorgar Burnfire, Rohan shut up and no longer tried to persuade him. The chief secretly shook his head. It seemed that his sister, who was so powerful, was still a knot in Gwell's heart. Gwells did not rush here from the port of Clearwater on a whim. The War of Revenge, which had lasted for 2 months, had finally come to an end. Under the command of Brian, the Sand Nation, who advocated the relocation of the small oasis, had won the final victory. The masterminds of the Silver Stream Massacre, the Wildwave clan and the Cutbone clan, had been wiped out. The 6 clans system of Iron Sand City had since become history. He was here to report the news on behalf of Brian. This kind of thing did not need to be done by the chief himself. However, because of the war, the Wild Flame clan had missed the great chief's coronation ceremony. Therefore, it was natural that he would be the one to deliver the news as a belated congratulatory gift to show his sincerity. Gwells was also very concerned about how Lorgar was doing. She would never write her difficulties in a letter. Some things were better to see with her own eyes. Chapter 1066. After entering the city, there was a sudden increase in the number of people coming and going. Although there were still people looking at them, It was only out of curiosity. Everyone walked in a hurry, and there was not a single loafer on the street. Father here. Rohan looked around in surprise. Yes. He nodded slightly. It was the first time Gwels had seen such a busy scene. He had traveled to many cities in the Northern Kingdom, and the most impressive thing about those cities was that they were prosperous. This was also a characteristic of the Northern Kingdom. The land and resources were far better than those in the southernmost region, creating many extraordinary cities. The only difference was that there was a mountain higher than the one before. He had thought that the Great Chief's King's city would reach a new height in this aspect. He did not expect that the first thing that attracted his attention was not the flat black stone street under his feet, nor the neat houses, but the people here. No matter how wide the inner city was or how magnificent the castle was, there were always homeless people, beggars, and rats lying on the street corners. They were like indispensable decorations in the city. However, walking in Neverwinter, not only did he not see those decorations, but the people's faces were also completely different from before. This kind of energetic look was rare even among the new big clans. Gwels had always thought that the Sand Nation was not much worse than the people in the Northern Kingdom, and they were even more enterprising because of the environment. Although the Northern Kingdom was rich in resources, the overly comfortable life made them indulge in enjoyment, and their courage and willpower were inferior. If it were not for the difficulty of gathering the power of the clans, they could have obtained a wider living space. However, now he did not dare to be so sure. That kind of pride and confidence that came from the heart was definitely not faked. Even if there were no firearms, it was best not to be enemies with a city made up of such citizens. Father, should we find Lorgar first or submit the document to the castle first? Rohan did not feel that deeply. Obviously, he was more curious than surprised. What's the hurry? If the Great Chief places us in the castle district, how do we test his promise? Gwels stared at him. Of course we'll stay for a few days and get to know this city better. But I've already decided, he interrupted. What are those people doing? One side of the square was filled with people, and the noise was rising and falling. It looked very lively. Rohan followed his line of sight and said, "They are probably buying discounted goods from the peddlers." "Go take a look," Gwels ordered. "Yes." He pulled up his hood, and with the advantage of his height and length, he quickly squeezed into the crowd. Gwels could not help but feel a little emotional as he looked at his eldest son's back, which was nearly 6 feet tall. In terms of physique, he should have been the bravest warrior in the clan, but he did not expect that he did not like to fight. In the end, the one who held up the Wild Flame clan was Lorgar, who was not born strong at all. It was precisely because of this that the third princess became the heir in the eyes of the people, and Rohan had always been suppressed to the point where he could not even raise his head. They were obviously siblings, but they rarely talked to each other. It could only be said that they were born to be mischievous. However, the clan leader was still a little disappointed, especially when Lorgar was the center of attention. Rohan did not resist at all. The Mahjins preferred the strong. Even if their skills were not as good as others, their unyielding will could still win the respect of others. At least it was better than surrendering without a fight. Therefore, even after Lorgar left, Gwels had not made up his mind to let his eldest son take over as the clan leader. Although Rohan had a good performance in other aspects, a leader who was afraid of competition could easily lose his original advantage when he hesitated. This was also the reason why Gwels brought his eldest son on this trip. He hoped to make Rohan change by increasing his knowledge. After a quarter of an hour, Rohan squeezed out of the crowd with a strange look on his face. "Father, they are all here to sign up for the sports day." "Sports day?" Gwels pondered. "What's that?" "It's a competition held by the Great Chief. I heard that it's to choose the fastest person in the world," Rohan explained. "And the first place will get 100 golden dragons as a reward. That's why there are so many applicants." Isn't this the same as the holy duel? Except there's no blood." Gwels clapped his hands and smiled. "It seems that the Great Chief has learned a lot from the Sand Nation. What's the condition to sign up? Since it's the fastest person in the world, we should also be able to participate." Rohan was stunned. "Father, Are you also going to participate? Of course, I was once a warrior who walked through half a desert on foot and left camels behind me. I've never lost to anyone in terms of leg strength. Gwels said as his beard trembled. Why do you think I'm old? Take me to sign up. Seeing that he could not stop him, Rohan had to agree. There are too many people there. I can go alone. It's okay, father. Gwels glanced at him. Is there something else you haven't told me? Rohan hesitated for a while and then said in a low voice, I saw third sister. In the crowd? No. His eldest son shook his head. She was in the painting wearing clothes that didn't cover her body. People surrounded her and pointed at her. What? Gwels frowned. Was the great chief trying to humiliate her? After he wrote a letter to Lorgar, Neverwinter responded quickly. He thought that His Majesty treated her well. If Lorgar endured humiliation just for the status of the Wildflame clan, then he would rather not have the green mountains and clear waters. Thinking of this, he walked into the crowd with a sullen face. The painting that Rohan mentioned was hanging on one side of the square. It looked very eye-catching, and there was more than one painting. When Gwels saw it, he could not help but be stunned. This is Lorgar? It was the first time that he saw his daughter so beautiful. She stood in the white snow, her white gauze and brocade fluttering in the wind. It was a court dress that Lorgar had never worn before. In Iron Sand City, she always wore the most suitable short clothes for fighting. Her chest and limbs were wrapped in bandages, and she was either covered in dust or bloodstains. When she did not need to fight, she would wrap herself up tightly and cover up her non-human features under thick clothes. This was what Rohan meant when he said that she did not cover up. Lorgar exposed her fluffy ears and tail, and as if she was deliberately attracting attention, she wore a sparkling ruby earring on one of her long ears. The bright color seemed to make the whole picture come alive. The people around them were not talking about disgust or rejection, but praise. This was also what surprised Gwels the most. In addition, during their conversation, he also heard a new word, magic shadow. I see. In the kingdom of Grey Castle, everyone is treated the same. Was this the great chief's way of doing things? He turned around and slapped Rohan. Don't make such a fuss next time. It's just showing her half-wolf form. Your sister is not a monster. I didn't think so. Gwels covered the back of his head and felt wronged. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.